Chapter 172. Looking up at Itachi and Kisame, Nagato, who was secretly controlling Yahiko, was relieved. He nodded with satisfaction, and his eyes flashed with a burning luster. In this way, the Akatsuki's list given by Dustless was finally complete. Is it my illusion? Strange. Yahiko, who was meditating, suddenly raised his head and looked at the distant sky. He couldn't help but frown as he felt that he was being watched. Maybe it's my fault. After carefully perceiving, Yahiko didn't find anything strange. He thought that maybe his nerves were too sensitive, and he didn't think that anyone in the world could escape his perception. I haven't seen you for a few years, and I didn't expect Uzumaki Nagato's strength to skyrocket. A frivolous and slightly surprised voice sounded. The person who was watching was actually Dustless. He didn't expect Uzumaki Nagato's strength to improve so fast that he could even detect his presence. It seems that Yahiko's death hit him a lot, and this hatred turned into a motivation to practice. But this is good. Staring at the vague figure in the distance, Dustless said with a relieved smile, and then looked at Kisame, who quickly got along with Uchiha Itachi, and couldn't help but shake his head. To some extent, these two people are really in tune, and can be regarded as an absolute combination of wisdom and courage. Dustless-sama. The ground at Dustless's feet suddenly exploded, and the Nepenthes came out of it. Staring at Dustless with a teasing smile on his face, White Zetsu said, "It seems that the chess pieces are all gathered, Zetsu. But before that, let's watch a good show." Looking at the members of the Akatsuki, Dustless's eyes fell on Orochimaru as he said, "Itachi, I have some private matters to discuss with you." Orochimaru tried his best to remain calm, and said to Itachi in a kind tone. Even if it sounded strange, Orochimaru said that he had done his best. However, the more Orochimaru was like this, the more Itachi felt that he was plotting something. "Orochimaru, a snake doesn't live with an ant. You should understand such a simple truth." Kisame directly interrupted, not giving any face to Orochimaru, this senior, at all. Everyone in Akatsuki organization was proud and arrogant, and this was a place where strength was the most important thing. There was no such thing as seniority. And Kisame didn't think that he was worse than Orochimaru. After all, he was the one who saved his life from Dustless, even if the other side completely let him win. "What did you say?" When Orochimaru heard this, the corners of his mouth twitched fiercely, and the smile he squeezed out suddenly froze. His expression changed constantly, and he looked at Brother Shark with an unkind expression. He didn't expect this kid to say this. Isn't this saying that Orochimaru's name? It was equivalent to slapping him in the face, and it was the loudest kind of slap. "Orochimaru." Uchiha Itachi turned his head casually, raised his eyelids, and looked at Orochimaru faintly, then turned his head, without looking at Orochimaru, and said calmly, "I have nothing to say to you." "Is that so? That's a pity." Hearing this, Orochimaru didn't get angry but laughed instead. The corners of his mouth curled up into a scary smile, and his snake eyes flickered with a sly light. He pretended to sigh and said with pity, "I thought you would be interested in that man, but now it seems that I thought too much." After saying that, Orochimaru turned around and left, without stopping at all. His back was exceptionally free and straightforward. "Although I don't know what you are planning, it doesn't matter if I go with you. I also have something to ask you." Itachi's eyes fell on Orochimaru, and he followed him indifferently. He knew that Orochimaru must be planning something, but he also had something to ask Orochimaru. "Itachi, I'm afraid that Orochimaru is after your Sharingan." Watching Itachi leave with Orochimaru, Kisame whispered to Itachi, and rationally analyzed. "I was lucky to see him in the Third War. That guy has always been obsessed with Uchiha Dustless. I guess he wants you because of your identity as Uchiha Dustless's younger brother, and of course your Sharingan." Looking at Orochimaru's back with disdain, Kisame continued, "I advise you not to go. Orochimaru is ambitious, and he joined the Akatsuki for that." "It doesn't matter, Kisame." Uchiha Itachi chuckled and stared at Kisame. His eyes flashed with a strange light, and he looked at him with admiration. Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover. This man who gave people the first impression of a rough man was, In fact, a man with a meticulous mind. What Kisame said was naturally the Rinnegan, because Orochimaru coveted the Rinnegan, so he attacked Yahiko, but he wasn't Yahiko's opponent and was defeated by him, so he joined the Akatsuki. As the saying goes, it's hard to change one's nature. Orochimaru was a man who pursued strength, and the Rinnegan. The sudden appearance of Uchiha Itachi gave Orochimaru a new prey. Don't worry about Kisame, he doesn't have the ability to take me down. A warm current flowed through Itachi's cold heart, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He knew that Gunpei Kisame was thinking for him, but he was also confident that not only was he not Orochimaru's prey, but Orochimaru was his prey. Itachi's pupils were cold, and he decisively followed. He knew that Orochimaru was after him, but if he could drive Orochimaru out of the Akatsuki, and let him lose the invisible umbrella of the Akatsuki, it's not a bad thing for Konoha's ninja village. At least, without the protection of the Akatsuki, Orochimaru would never be as ostentatious as he was now, and at least, he would stay hidden and consolidate his power in the future. Chapter 173. On the ancient steps, Uchiha Itachi walked alone with a calm expression. Behind him was Orochimaru, whose face was pale, and whose eyes were shining from time to time. Uchiha Itachi, no matter what it takes, I will get your Sharingan and your body. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes slightly, secretly looking at Itachi's body. The more he looked, the more satisfied he was, and his heart was uncontrollable. Orochimaru seemed to be blinded by lard and lost his mind. A thick and long python drilled out of his left arm uncontrollably, spitting out scarlet tongue. The scarlet bloody mouth was wide open at Itachi, and a subtle hissing sound could be heard. Obviously, Orochimaru was impatient. Whoosh! In the end, Orochimaru couldn't suppress his greed. His eyes flashed with a touch of ruthlessness, and the giant earth-colored snake on his left arm went straight to Itachi's waist. An unprecedented force wrapped around Uchiha Itachi tightly. It wrapped around him for more than a dozen times before it stopped. It looked at Itachi with a ferocious expression, hissing and spitting out its long tongue. It circled around Itachi, which was particularly scary and gloomy. However, Itachi didn't turn his head from beginning to end. Orochimaru was behind him as if he was invisible. Can you answer my question now, Orochimaru? Looking at the blue sky in front of him, Itachi said calmly. He already knew that Orochimaru didn't have good intentions. The only thing he didn't expect was that Orochimaru would be so anxious. Although it was somewhat unexpected, it was also within Itachi's expectations. Answer your question? Is your brain not enough? You are my prey now, and you have been successfully caught. Do you think I need to answer your so-called question? In this world, the strong have the final say. Orochimaru sneered at Itachi, who was bound by the snake in front of him. His pale face showed disdain and contempt. Itachi had been successfully caught by him, and the so-called question didn't exist. It was his freedom to answer it or not. In other words, suddenly turned his head, revealing half of his face, looking at the proud Orochimaru, Itachi said coldly, "As long as I defeat you, I can answer my question. It's too easy." After that, Itachi's eyes suddenly turned scarlet, staring at the sky in front of him, and strong evil fluctuations surged out of his eyes. Too easy? Orochimaru's face suddenly collapsed. Not to mention that he had already subdued Itachi, he was also one of the former Sannin. Now that Itachi said that it was too easy to defeat him, how could he be calm? He couldn't help but want to teach Itachi a lesson. This is Orochimaru, who was about to teach Uchiha Itachi a lesson, suddenly found that he couldn't move at all. His body seemed to be forced into a chisel, and he couldn't move at all. Just like the previous Haiden, Orochimaru couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Golden Bind Genjutsu. Damn it. Looking at Itachi with a pale face, Orochimaru cursed in his heart. He was particularly depressed. He had warned himself to pay attention to Itachi's Genjutsu, but he didn't expect that he would still fall for it unknowingly. If it wasn't for Itachi, he wouldn't even be aware of it. This shows how terrible Itachi's Genjutsu is. Under these eyes, any jutsu you use will be seen through. The serpent binding Itachi's body also disappeared. Itachi turned around and stared at Orochimaru, who was sweating in cold sweat, and said in a casual tone, as if what he did was not worth mentioning. So that's how it is, worthy of being Dustless, Kuren's younger brother. I really can't underestimate him. Orochimaru tried his best to control the hand seals, and when he was about to launch a ninjutsu to break the binding of the genjutsu, a cold light suddenly appeared in front of him. Pucci. Orochimaru's left arm was suddenly cut off like cutting vegetables, and dark red blood spurted out of the wound, just like Orochimaru's personality. Tell me, what do you know about that man? You should have teamed up with him to deal with the ninjas of the Rock Village. You know a lot of secrets that people don't know. You'd better tell me everything, otherwise, I don't mind making you confess everything in the world of the Manjikyu Sharingan. The Sharingan of 3 Tomo Sharingan was instantly formed, and the pitch-black windmill was clearly visible. The fluctuation of eye power was more than 10 times stronger than the previous 3 Tomo Sharingan. What a powerful eye power! Orochimaru's face changed slightly when he saw this, and he lowered his head and pondered. When he used genjutsu to bind him, Itachi's pupils were clearly 3 Tomo Sharingan, and now they have become Manjikyu Sharingan, which means that it will be more difficult to deal with them before. Tell me everything you know, or I don't mind letting you have a taste of Tsukuyami. Looking down at Orochimaru's eyes coldly, Itachi said coldly, and at the same time, a horrible murderous aura overflowed from his body and shrouded Orochimaru's body. The cold murderous aura stabbed Orochimaru like a blade, causing him to feel a tingling sensation on his skin. What a strong murderous aura. But do you think you can kill me like this? You're too naive anyway. I'm one of the 3 Sannin, Orochimaru, so don't get carried away, kid of the Uchiha clan. Orochimaru's pale and sweaty face suddenly became ferocious, his neck elongated like a rubber, and he bit towards Itachi in the distance like a vicious beast. The corner of his mouth revealed sharp fangs, and even the corner of his mouth overflowed with disgusting saliva. At this moment, Orochimaru looked like a giant snake, and he didn't look like a human. Compared with Uchiha Dustless, you're still too far away, kid. Chapter 174. Itachi's Manjikyu Sharingan froze as he looked at the oncoming snake head indifferently. His face was expressionless as he cast a pitiful look at Orochimaru. Amaterasu. As Itachi's voice fell, a black flame suddenly appeared on Orochimaru's head. The inextinguishable ghost fire swallowed Orochimaru's entire head. It seemed that he would die without a doubt. Orochimaru should be dead now. Zetsu and Dustless stood side by side in the distance, especially when they saw the black flame on Orochimaru's head. White Zetsu's tone seemed to be filled with unprecedented joy, and he couldn't wait for Orochimaru to die early. It's reasonable for White Zetsu to think so. After all, Amaterasu is known as the strongest physical attack. Not everyone can use the Tensigen or Rinnegan to absorb Amaterasu like Dustless. For ordinary people, Amaterasu is a dead end. Not everyone can use Yin-Yang release to nullify Amaterasu. At least Orochimaru can't. Orochimaru is not so fragile. If Amaterasu can kill him, maybe he would have died many years ago. How can Itachi kill him? Dustless shook his head and denied. Even if Orochimaru is not Itachi's opponent, if he was killed by Amaterasu, Orochimaru, one of the Sannin, would have died long ago. Ka. The black flame that swallowed Orochimaru's head suddenly made a crisp sound, and then the black flame fell, and Orochimaru's head was still intact. Is this molting? Looking at the intact Orochimaru, Itachi frowned slightly, and then looked at the ground swallowed by the black flame, and his eyes flashed with a touch of understanding. How can this be? White Zetsu was speechless. He didn't expect that Orochimaru could escape Amaterasu by molting. Even the silent black Zetsu looked at the black flame on the ground. Wuchen didn't care. He was extremely indifferent, because Uchiha Sasuke used substitution jutsu to escape Uchiha Itachi's Amaterasu in the later stage. In fact, it was not much different from the way of molting in front of him. There's no reason why Orochimaru can't do it. Kusanagi sword. Orochimaru suddenly spat out a sharp tachi from his mouth, flashing with a scorching light. This tachi gave off a feeling of extreme sharpness, and even the light reflected from the tachi could pierce people's eyes. Stupid Orochimaru, I should have told you just now that under these eyes, any jutsu you use will be seen through. No matter what kind of jutsu you use, it won't work, even the most basic one. Itachi said faintly. He didn't hide, he's, and let's head swords. Clang. Itachi, SSSS body. His body's is left. Kuden's, SSS, and that was, SSSS bodies. And raps, this is, Eraser retracted his head, and Orochimaru's pupils suddenly shrank as he stared at the crimson skeleton that he had never seen before. Feeling the fluctuations of the evil chakra on it, a sense of powerlessness rose in his heart. Looks like I won't be able to take over his entire body. Orochimaru's eyes flashed with sadness, and he sighed in disappointment. Soon after, he spread out his huge perception in all directions, and perceived several figures rushing towards him. He knew that today he would have to stop here, and leave Akatsuki for good. One day, I will have to take over your body. Orochimaru looked at Itachi reluctantly. Of course, most of his eyes were on Itachi's Manjikyu Sharingan. If he wasn't forced by the situation, Orochimaru wouldn't mind fighting him to the death. However, Akatsuki's people had already noticed this, and were rushing over from all directions. Bang! Just as Orochimaru's voice fell, his body suddenly emitted white smoke, and disappeared without a trace. Obviously, he used extremely fast body flicker jutsu to slip away. After all, he couldn't fight against all the members of Akatsuki. Orochimaru betrayed us just like that. He really can't be trusted. Noticing that Orochimaru disappeared like a ghost, Dustless said with a smile. From his frivolous and playful tone, it was not difficult to know that he already expected Orochimaru to defect. Dustless was calm as usual. Orochimaru defected from Akatsuki at this time. And then Itachi, Kisame, and Sasori went to Rock Village to defeat Deidara and forced him to join Akatsuki. This guy seems to be able to predict everything. Black Zetsu's single eye secretly peeped at Dustless, thinking about his deeds. Not only now but also in the past, he could always predict everything in advance. It was really strange. What are you thinking, Black Zetsu? Half of Black Jew's body suddenly stiffened. He raised his head and suddenly saw Wu Chen looking at him with a smile. Wu Chen's indifferent eyes saw through everything with endless ridicule, as if he could see through everything. Black Jew's body immediately broke out in cold sweat. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. Just now, it was as if thousands of years of secrets were peeped by Wu Chen. Orochimaru has defected. I am thinking about who is suitable to replace him. After a short period of absent-mindedness, Black Zetsu said calmly, after thousands of years of dormancy, experiencing countless ups and downs, Black Zetsu's heart has long been as tough as iron, and his pupils were abnormally calm. He said softly to Dustless. This old guy's reaction is quite fast. Dustless sneered again and again. His visual capture ability was extremely strong. Even the slightest flaw of Black Zetsu couldn't escape his eyes. Even if he concealed it very quickly, he still caught the flaw of Black Zetsu. Although for the current Dustless, killing Black Zetsu is almost as simple as eating and drinking water, but now is obviously not the best time. And even if he kills Black Zetsu, he needs to use Rinnegan or Tensegan to extract his memory. Chapter 175. Orochimaru's defection is indeed troublesome. At present, the number of members of the Akatsuki has just been gathered. Now that Orochimaru suddenly left, the morale will inevitably be hit, which is tantamount to directly slapping Pain's face. The members of the Akatsuki quickly rushed over, and saw the scene of the previous battle, and the residual chakra energy fluctuations in the air. They all frowned slightly. Obviously, there was an unusually fierce battle before, and the missing Orochimaru should belong to the defeated party, especially the broken arm that was still bleeding on the ground. Obviously it was Orochimaru's. Damn Orochimaru. After listening to Uchiha Itachi's story, Pain's face was blue. The majestic murderous aura was vast and infinite. Like a hurricane, the cold air froze the surrounding flowers and trees. Looking at Orochimaru's broken arm, he raised his hand and shot out a fiery red light, turning it into ashes. Perceiving Pain's violent and restless momentum, the Akatsuki members' faces changed. This boss who rarely shows his strength is so fierce. Of course, it is not ruled out that Pain is deliberately showing off. What should we do with Orochimaru? He knows a lot of secrets in the organization. As Orochimaru's teammate, Sasori asked in a deep voice. He used to work with Orochimaru, so he knew Orochimaru's temperament very well. If he is left alone, it is definitely raising a tiger, and one day he will be caught in a cocoon. Kakuzu and I will kill him. I have long been unhappy with that disgusting snake. This kind of task is the most suitable for Master Haiden, right Kakuzu? Indeed. Looking at the excited Haiden beside him, Kakuzu nodded this time. For him, money is more important than anything. Orochimaru's head is worth a lot of money in the black market. Killing a defected ninja in the organization, and making a lot of money by the way, Kakuzu has no reason to refuse this kind of thing. Don't worry about Orochimaru for the time being. He should know that disclosing the secrets of the organization to the world will lead to a miserable end. Orochimaru is a smart person, he won't do such a stupid thing. After pondering for a long time, Pain calmly analyzed. Orochimaru had already joined the Akatsuki for some time. If he didn't open his eyes and expose the secrets of the Akatsuki to the world, he believed that even if he didn't do it himself, the two masked men behind the scenes would talk to Orochimaru. The two masked men were undoubtedly Dustless and Obito. It seems that I have to find someone to replace Orochimaru. Yahiko looked around and felt a headache coming on. It's not easy to find a powerful S-class ninja without a fixed organization. After so many years, he only found a few in front of him, and they were all rebellious ninjas. Looks like I can only give him a headache. On second thought, Yahiko passed the ball to Uchiha Obito, because Kisame and Itachi were introduced into the Akatsuki through Uchiha Obito. This is interesting. Seeing that Akatsuki was paralyzed because of the lack of manpower, Dustless, who was quietly observing in the dark, suddenly smiled. A brand new plan suddenly emerged in his mind, and after a short calculation, he felt that it was feasible and could be considered a good plan. Dustless, Sama means. Looking at Dustless in confusion, White Zetsu said in a daze. Dustless's thinking was too fast, and he couldn't keep up with the rhythm. You're the only one in the world who knows that the masked man is Dustless Uchiha. Even Obito doesn't know about this, but even if they don't know, I think they've already suspected me. Dustless said with a strange smile. I mean, even if Obito and Uzumaki Nagato didn't say anything, I'm afraid they've already suspected that I'm the masked man, including Uchiha Itachi. Dustless was open-minded about this. Uchiha Madara's Eye of the Moon plan was full of mistakes, let alone him. If it wasn't for Obito's help behind the scenes to perfect the plan, I'm afraid the so-called Eye of the Moon would have already collapsed. In other words, no plan designed by anyone is perfect. Even gods are no exception. Even if Black Zetsu finally succeeded in resurrecting Kagaya, I'm afraid he didn't expect that Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke would seal Kagaya again. It's very likely that they may have guessed that the masked man is Dustless Sama. Black Zetsu nodded slowly. Uzumaki Nagato and Uchiha Obito were not easy to deal with, and Uzumaki Nagato and Uchiha Obito were very close in the past 2 years. Maybe the two have exchanged their opinions with each other. In that case, why don't I jump out directly? With a scornful smile on his face, Dustless said directly. No matter what, Sun Wukong will never jump out of Gautama Buddha's palm. This world can't jump out of the palm of Dustless's hand. Dustless, Sama, do you want to expose your identity? White Zetsu asked doubtfully. Looking at Dustless's appearance, he wanted to jump from behind the scenes to the front, which means that the previous plan may be completely aborted. I kind of understand Dustless, Sama's meaning. Black Zetsu was worthy of being an old fox who lived for thousands of years. After a moment of silence, he immediately understood Dustless's intention, and nodded uncontrollably, thinking that it was feasible. Dustless's face was frozen, and his eyes were shining. Since Uchiha Obito, Uzumaki Nagato, and Uchiha Itachi have secretly guessed that he is the masked man, it's better to jump to the front, and in front of them. Uchiha Kagami will replace the masked man, and secretly control Uchiha Obito and the Akatsuki. From then on, The masked man will be Uchiha Kagami. The masked man will be replaced by Uchiha Kagami, and Uchiha Dustless will jump to the front and join the Akatsuki, completely clearing the suspicion that the masked man is Uchiha Dustless. Chapter 176. 3 days later, in the Rain Village, in the misty rain in a dirty room, two isolated figures could be clearly seen. It was Pain and Uchiha Obito with a mask. This is really tricky, damn Orochimaru. He should know what to do and what not to do. Obito whispered to himself with a little bit of killing intent. If Orochimaru really dared to reveal the purpose of the Akatsuki, he wouldn't mind personally destroying his nest. Let's find a new member first. Orochimaru's matter can be temporarily put aside. Obito pondered and sighed silently. He couldn't think of a suitable person to replace Orochimaru. It's better to look for him. Seeing that Obito didn't have a suitable candidate, Yahiko suggested gloomily. No matter when, his voice always gave a very gloomy and heavy feeling. The him in his mouth was naturally the masked man Dustless. We can only ask him. Obito nodded silently, and just as he was about to activate his Kamui and leave, Dustless, who rarely shows up, suddenly appeared like a ghost. Unexpectedly, there was a young man with delicate features following behind him. Long time no see, Nagato. The masked man stared at Yahiko with a black iron rod, and his face was filled with a pleasant smile. His tone was the same as the first time they met a few years ago. Nagato, who was controlling Yahiko, was slightly stunned and immediately nodded. Who is that? Looking at the hazy figure hidden in the darkness, Obito frowned and then looked at the masked man with displeasure. Obviously, he was very dissatisfied with this approach. He suddenly brought an inexplicable person, especially when he didn't know whether this person was an enemy or a friend. He is the one who is about to replace Orochimaru, the new member of the Akatsuki, Uchiha Dustless. At this moment, the masked man was Uchiha Kagami. He and Dustless were quite similar in stature, and the tone of voice and the use of jutsu were exactly the same. He was also wearing a mask, so he didn't arouse Obito and Pain's suspicion. Yo! A young man walked out of the darkness with a smile on his face. His appearance was similar to Itachi's. He looked very young, in his 20s. He smiled at Obito and Yahiko, giving off a very gentle feeling. How could it be him? Then who is this masked man? After being stunned for a while, Obito roared in his heart, and looked at Dustless's smiling face with uncertainty. A long time ago, Obito suspected that the masked man was Uchiha Dustless. Especially when he destroyed Konoha, his strength made him suspect Dustless, but the scene in front of him completely subverted his inference. Sure enough, Obito already guessed that it was me, but it's still too early for you to fight with me. Seeing the look of disbelief in Obito's eyes, Dustless laughed in his heart. He can be sure that this kid's heart is in a mess right now. I'm afraid that he's trying to figure out who this masked man is. Dustless, who has both the Tensigen and the Rinnegan, has a far better control of the yin-yang release than others. The masked Uchiha Kagami in front of him was like a normal human, breathing and heartbeat. The only difference is that his consciousness was controlled by Dustless. I didn't expect you to still be alive. Yahiko looked at Dustless with indifference. After a few years, he still couldn't forget Dustless. It was Dustless who defeated him, Yahiko and Konan. Fortunately, Uchiha Madara saved him in order to prevent the plan from failing, otherwise he would have died a long time ago. From now on he will replace Orochimaru and form a team with Sasori of the Red Sand. Uchiha Kagami's voice was indifferent. He was too lazy to explain more to Dustless, just like Dustless's usual style. There is no problem with this. Obito and Yahiko looked at each other and couldn't help but nod. Dustless's strength was beyond doubt, especially Yahiko, who knew Dustless's strength better. Many years ago, he could easily crush the three of them. His strength was even better than his own Rinnegan. Obito nodded and didn't choose to ask more. Now he was just thinking about who the masked man in front of him was. After all, Dustless, who he suspected to be the masked man, has come out, so the masked man in front of him was obviously someone else. As for the problem of Uchiha Wuchin, it's just a trivial matter. Yahiko welcomed Dustless to join the Akatsuki. This way, not only can they solve the population problem, but they can also get a free super strong fighting force, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. A month later, in the gloomy cave, there was no light all year round. The coldness and darkness were the most realistic portrayals of this place. In the depths of the cave, one could see a blurry, tall shadow. It was about 10 meters tall, and its entire body was covered in uneven protrusions. It was especially terrifying. There were 10 cylindrical protrusions on its back, and its wounds were as smooth as if they had been cut off. It made one's imagination run wild, especially when one looked up and saw that the giant had 9 huge eyes. It invisibly added a lot of fear. It was the Getomazo. A few years ago, Dustless gave the Getomazo to Uzumaki Nagato. Anyway, he didn't need it for the time being, so he gave it to the embryonic form of the Akatsuki. Of course, the Getomazo also sealed the Kyubi's in attribute chakra. Looking around, the Getomazo opened its hands, and 9 figures stood on its 10 huge fingers. All of them were wearing black trench coats embroidered with strange and dazzling red clouds. This time, it wasn't like the usual, where all the members of the Akatsuki showed up in their original form, including Uchiha Itachi, Pain, and Konan. All the members of the Akatsuki showed up to greet the new members. Among them, the most unhappy were the zombie duo Kakuzu and Haiden. Chapter 177. The reason why Fei Duan and Kakuzu were the most upset was because the 2 of them had accepted a mission from the black market to earn extra money. Just as they were about to completely kill each other, they were forcibly recalled back because of Pain's order. Then Fei Duan and Kakuzu were quite dissatisfied, especially Kakuzu, who loved money like his life. How could he not be angry when the cooked duck flew away? That newcomer's face is really big, he actually made us all wait for him. Haiden's voice sounded, obviously, he was quite dissatisfied with this so-called newcomer. Although he was not as obsessed with money as Haiden, he enjoyed the process of fighting very much. Now that he was forcibly summoned by Pain, he was also holding back the anger in his heart. It seems that our S-class rebellious ninjas are becoming more and more worthless. Any random person who comes here needs us to greet him. Kakuzu complained, but when he could make a lot of money, it was interrupted by this newcomer, so naturally he didn't show the slightest mercy to this so-called newcomer. Although the other members of Akatsuki didn't speak, their faces were faintly showing some dissatisfaction. It would be ridiculous to say that one person made all of them come here once. Oh, I'm sorry to make you wait for me. Shizuka's laughter had a bit of banter, especially the frivolous and indifferent tone, which made Kakuzu's face collapse. His oily green eyes flashed with ominous light, and his whole body was filled with cold killing intent. With a murderous gaze, he looked at the place where the voice came from under the dark rock. After a few breaths of time, a handsome young man in his 20s came into view. His appearance was similar to Uchiha Itachi's, and he had a bright smile on his face. He didn't seem to fit in with the Akatsuki, an organization composed entirely of rebellious ninjas. Uchiha Dustless, it's you? The first one to speak was not Kisame, who had seen Dustless before and fought with him, but rather Konan, who had never spoken and was also the only female member of Akatsuki, who had an indifferent face like an angel. It's really him, it's impossible, he's already dead. Kisame looked at Dustless, who was in his 20s, and his face was gloomy. Although the last time he saw Dustless was a few years ago, he could never forget the appearance of Dustless in his life. Even if he grew up now, he could still recognize him at a glance. However, it was said that Uchiha Dustless was dead, and he suddenly came back to life. Even with his beast-like ability to accept and adapt, he couldn't accept such a reality. He stopped thinking and looked at Dustless with a smile on his face, especially when the person in front of him was about to become his companion. The one with the most complicated thoughts was undoubtedly Uchiha Itachi. His 3-tomo Sharingan was like stagnant water. He was sure that the person in front of him, who he had never met before, was his big brother. The feeling of blood connection in his bones wouldn't lie. The Sand Village was defeated by him. Sasori also looked over and muttered to himself in surprise. Looking at Dustless, who was in his 20s, His pupils flashed with a strange color. He was a ninja who betrayed the Sand Village, so naturally, he was curious about Dustless who defeated the Sand Village. Everyone's heart was active, thinking about Dustless's past. Even the slightest details were not missed. Well, it's just another vase who knows how to play genjutsu. A disdainful sneer resounded. The owner of the voice was none other than Haydn, who looked at Dustless contemptuously with a proud and arrogant smile on his face. Obviously, he still held a grudge against Uchiha for being controlled by Uchiha's Sharingan last time, especially with the 3-section scythe on his shoulder. There was no doubt that he was looking for trouble. Reckless thing. Kisame's disdainful gaze swept past Haydn, cursing in his heart that they deserved to be called the zombie duo. Their brains are full of paste. Uchiha Dustless and he are not in the same dimension at all. However, Kisame was too lazy to meddle in other people's business. After all, a character like Haydn can't be persuaded easily, and he and Haydn are quite disagreeable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to laugh at Haydn and see the strength of Uchiha Dustless. How can he easily let it go? I've heard that Haydn's brain is lacking a string, sure enough. Looking at Haydn and Kakuzu behind him without fear, Dustless was speechless. He just joined the Akatsuki, and someone came out to slap his face. It's really bad luck. Let me see if you're just a vase who knows how to use Sharingan. Haydn sneered at Dustless, the 3-section scythe in his hand, and at the same time he turned his head and looked at the silent Uchiha Itachi. It was self-evident who he was talking about. Bring it on. Smiling casually, Dustless looked at Haydn without fear, and his thumb pointed at Haydn and Kakuzu, indicating the zombie duo to bring it on. A straight light flashed from his palm, and quickly materialized, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into an extremely sharp Kusanagi sword. Courting death. The murderous light in Kakuzu's eyes suddenly shot out, and the murderous aura of his body swarmed out like a tide. He originally thought that Dustless was going to fight with Haydn, but he didn't expect that he would also fight with Haydn, 1 against 2. It's simply outrageous. It's a slap in their faces. Since you two don't want to come, then I will. With a chuckle, Dustless's body lost its texture and flashed with a dazzling light, which was very conspicuous in the dark cave. The light body turned into a straight golden light and went straight out, disappearing in an instant. So fast. The members of the Akatsuki were stunned, and even the calm Uchiha Itachi's face changed slightly, and he frowned. His big brother was indeed a bit evil. Only Pain, Conan, and Kisame could keep their faces unchanged, and only Pain, who fought with Dustless in the past. Chapter 178. Seeing Dustless suddenly and strangely disappear, Fei Duan and Jiao were both stunned. Immediately, in the dark space, a cold light suddenly streaked across the air. Fei Duan almost instinctively picked up the red 3-section scythe in his hand to block. Clang! The buzzing sound of the collision of steel resounded, and the sparks were particularly dazzling. Through the faint light that disappeared in a flash, they could clearly see Dustless with a smile on his face. It seemed that he was surprised that Haydn could resist his attack, and there were faint ripples in his pupils. This guy. What a powerful force. Feeling the tremendous power imparted by the scarlet scythe, Fei Duan's expression changed drastically. He sucked in a breath of cold air, and revealed a look of astonishment and shock. In that instant of confrontation, his arm was shaken to the point of numbness. Because he couldn't withstand the impact of the tremendous power, his body was forced back several steps before he could barely withstand the slash. Do you even put me in your eyes? A cold and hoarse voice sounded, and then there was a shrill sound. Looking up, they saw a flash of lightning appearing in the palm of Kakuzu. They could clearly see the silver lightning dagger. Whoosh! The sound of a whistling sound sounded, and then they saw the silver dagger whistling through the air. The crackling sound of thunder obviously showed that this ninjutsu was not simple, and it wanted to penetrate Dustless's chest. Insignificant skill. Wu Chen's tranquil eyes stared at the approaching blade light. He didn't move from the beginning to the end, quietly and calmly waiting for the arrival of the butcher's knife. His deep and bright eyes were calm and composed. His whole body was suffused with a golden luster, as gentle as the sun, giving people a warm and serene feeling. Pretentious brat. Her nose wrinkled slightly, and there were some faint ripples in Conan's beautiful pupils. She immediately whispered in dissatisfaction. Even if Dustless was now an adult, perhaps her impression of him was still the brat from the beginning. Although Conan's voice was as soft as a mosquito, someone still heard it. Payne turned his head and looked at Conan in surprise. He immediately bowed his head and pondered. There was a faint light in the depths of his eyes, and then he recovered his calmness. The sharp silver light was about to penetrate Dustless. Looking at it, the sharp blade condensed by lightning went straight through Dustless's body. The thunder-long blade was like a stone in the sea. Dustless's body was covered with golden waves, and he immediately shuttled through it. On the other side, Haydn was bloody unlucky. Poochie. A piercing pain spread throughout his body, and scarlet blood splashed out. Fei Duan subconsciously touched his chest and reached out to touch it. Then he raised his hand and stared blankly at the crimson blood in his hand. The corner of his mouth twitched violently, and a shrill scream that sounded like a pig being slaughtered resounded throughout the cave, echoing for a long time. Kakuzu, you old bastard, did you do it on purpose? Fei Duan was so angry that he was trembling. His face kept twitching as he looked at Kakuzu. His gloomy eyes were clearly saying, "Even if I'm immortal, you can't test my body so casually. You'll be ruined. This is an accidental injury. I didn't expect him to have such a strange ability." Kakuzu's face was gloomy, and he argued with a red face. It's okay to be despised by others, but if he was looked at by Haydn's gloomy eyes, Kakuzu would feel uncomfortable all over, even if it was his fault. Haydn looked at Kakuzu gloomily when he heard this. If it weren't for his immortal body, he would have already died. Now is not the time for you two to exchange feelings. The scarlet Sharingan appeared, and the deep blood-red Tomo was like rolling condensed blood, full of ominous. The blood-red light flashing in the darkness was particularly gloomy, and the powerful eye power made people palpitate. Gulp. What a terrifying eye. Haydn's soul was throbbing under the gaze of the scarlet Tomo, and his throat twitched up and down. Suddenly, he remembered Itachi's method of controlling him last time, and subconsciously closed his eyes. However, it was too late. Boom. The powerful eye power directly poured into Fei Duan's mind, controlling his thoughts. His eyes became dull and lifeless, and the sharp sickle in his hand fell to the ground, splashing up a cloud of dust. He felt like a walking corpse that had been stripped of his inner soul. Why does the 3 Tomo Sharingan have such great eye power? Itachi frowned slightly as he glanced at Wuchen from the corner of his eyes. Obviously, the Sharingan has 3 Tomo Sharingan, but it gives people the feeling of a Mangekyo. But Dustless apparently noticed Itachi's gaze, and he also looked at Itachi on the finger of the Geto Mazo, showing a gentle smile, giving people a warm feeling. Seeing this, Itachi was slightly stunned, and then he nodded, and a strange feeling rose in his heart. He felt that Dustless's motives were not pure, and he began to be secretly vigilant. Even if this person was his brother, he couldn't let it go. Hypocritical man. Conan naturally saw Dustless's expression, and she, who didn't like Dustless, naturally snorted. Especially that ordinary smile made her particularly uncomfortable. Seeing that Haydn was instantly KO'd, Kakuzu's mouth twitched fiercely, and when he was about to sneak attack Dustless, Payne, who was usually silent, suddenly stopped this boring duel. It's over, Kakuzu. Looking at the murderous Kakuzu, Payne then looked at the unconscious Haydn with pity, and shook his head slightly. Maybe the Sharingan is this kid's nemesis, and he lost twice under the Sharingan. Break his genjutsu. Glancing at Dustless casually, Payne's tone was indifferent, and there was a faint will that could not be violated. Maybe after all these years, he has really regarded himself as a special godlike existence. I'll let you be cocky for a while. Dustless couldn't help muttering in his heart, and at the same time, looking at the half-dead Haydn, he put away the scarlet-red Tomo and broke Haydn's genjutsu. Chapter 179. Opening his eyes in a trance, Haydn looked at the world in front of him like a child who had just woken up, and what he saw was the old face of Kakuzu. Stand up quickly after making a fool of yourself. Don't make me lose face with you. Kakuzu scolded Haiden with a gloomy expression. He was the most senior member of the Akatsuki. After all, he was an old antique who was almost 100 years old, and was a contemporary of the first Hokage Senju Hashirama. Where did that kid go? Look at me, Uncle Haiden. Shut up. Kakuzu glared fiercely at Fei Dan, then looked away and silently returned to his original position on the ghetto statue's finger. Fei Dan tactfully followed Kakuzu back. Uchiha Dustless. Looking at Dustless expressionlessly, Pain's calm eyes flickered with faint ripples. After a moment of silence, he finally made a shocking decision. From today on, you are one of the members of the Akatsuki organization. Throwing the black trench coat embroidered with red clouds to Dustless, Pain stopped, but he didn't intend to give the blue ring to Dustless. Serves you right, kid. Seeing this scene, Haiden laughed secretly. I'm afraid that Dustless is the most miserable one in the history of the Akatsuki. He doesn't have a ring that represents his status as a member of the Akatsuki organization. But soon, Haiden's eyes widened as he looked at Pain's action in disbelief, and his breathing stopped. Looking thoughtfully at the silent Sasori, Pain withdrew his gaze and immediately looked at Xiao Nan, who was as cold as an iceberg. Xiao Nan's pretty face had an unapproachable expression. His eyes flashed with a touch of decisiveness. He took off the ring with the word 0 on his finger and handed it to Wu Chun. Everyone was stunned. From now on, your code name is 0, and this is the ring that represents your identity. Under the astonished gaze of everyone, Pain threw the ring in his hand to Dustless without hesitation, and looked at Dustless very seriously, and indifferently said, From now on, you and Conan are a team. Wu Chun frowned when he heard the words. His deep black pupils stared at Pain's stagnant eyes, and then a hint of understanding flashed in his eyes. He is going to let Conan monitor me. Thinking quickly, Dustless quickly saw through Pain's plan. No one in the Akatsuki could be trusted, but only Conan was trustworthy, and it was not difficult to see that Pain didn't trust Dustless that much. Even if he was sent by the masked man, he sent Conan to monitor Dustless. Although 0, this ring represented the leader in a certain sense, but the members of Akatsuki organization couldn't possibly recognize Dustless as their boss just because this ring was given to Dustless. Conan was unusually calm, and her performance was very calm. Without a doubt, she also saw through Pain's intention, and knew his motive for arranging her to secretly monitor Dustless. Although she hated Dustless, but regarding Pain's command, Conan still chose to obey without hesitation. Scorpio, on the other hand, was quite calm. For him, it didn't matter if he had teammates or not. If he didn't like them, he would kill them all the same. Out of sight, out of mind. In short, Akatsuki organization gathered all kinds of freaks. Whether it was their strength or their character, they were all like this. As for Sasori's teammate, I have already found a candidate. Looking at Sasori, Pain continued to say, Deidara of the Rock Village is a good candidate, but that kid's character seems to be a bit hard. This time, Itachi, Kisame, Sasori, Conan, and Dustless, you 5 will tame him. Deidara was now young, but his reputation was already known. When he was 9 years old, he was forced to leave the village because he often caused terrorist incidents. He was the disciple of the 3rd-generation Tsuchikage, Anoki. Now he was 12 years old, and his strength was far stronger than 3 years ago. It seems that there is a difficult task for him to join for the first time. That explosive clay maniac is very difficult to deal with. I heard that because he is too dangerous, Anoki sent him to a place where there are few people. The one who spoke was naturally Dustless. He smiled and explained to the members of the Akatsuki. The only thing that made people frown was that his smile was like a cunning fox. Indeed. Pain nodded. He seemed surprised that Dustless knew about Deidara. Even if Deidara was now famous, he was still not worth mentioning to Dustless. Can he really be trusted? Sasori said with some doubts. It was really difficult for him to team up with a kid who was nearly 12 years old. Even if Itachi was only 13.5 years old, he couldn't eliminate the doubts in his heart. Perhaps Kisame also had doubts about this before he saw Uchiha Itachi. Pain's eyes flashed with hesitation. Deidara's strength was acceptable, but it didn't mean that other aspects were acceptable. For example, personality, to some extent, was the opposite of Daedara. Daedale and Sasori of the Red Sand both pursue the so-called art. They are the same people, but the difference is also the difference between heaven and earth. Daedale pursues the art of the moment, while Sasori of the Red Sand pursues the art of eternity. This was the biggest difference between heaven and earth. It was inevitable that there would be quarrels. With Sasori's temperament, he might really make Daedara a puppet. Let's go to the rock village first. Seeing that Pain was hesitant, Dustless suggested tentatively. Daedale was still very compatible with Scorpio of the Red Sand. Even if there was a quarrel, Scorpio of the Red Sand may not be able to kill Daedale. Pain nodded when he heard this. It could only be like this. Whether it was suitable or not, only by meeting them will they know. Chapter 180. On the path in the dense forest, two isolated figures were slowly moving forward. Their black trench coats were embroidered with red clouds. One of them was obviously a woman, with dark blue hair and a lavender paper flower on the right side of her head. Her delicate and dignified appearance was filled with endless indifference. It was Conan. The tall young man beside her was a head taller than Conan. His slightly messy but neat hair fluttered in the wind from time to time, adding a little wild and unruly feeling. Who else could it be but Dustless? Dustless was particularly conspicuous in his black trench coat. The front of his fingers was painted black and purple, and he wore a wooden hat with some bells. As the breeze blew, the white ribbon tied to the bamboo hat would dance in the wind, and the bell on it would also let out a crisp silver bell sound. Time flew by. 3 days had already passed since the last short gathering. During this period of time, Dustless and Conan had also formed a brand new combination of God's messenger. There was no need to doubt that they were absolutely the most powerful combination in the Akatsuki organization. Although Conan didn't like Dustless, she put down the grudge in her heart and chose to obey Uzumaki Nagato's arrangement. She formed a team with Dustless to monitor Dustless, and also to borrow his strength to help the Akatsuki organization collect several tailed beasts as soon as possible. As if thinking of something, Conan's footsteps suddenly stopped. Looking at Dustless's back, she was puzzled. What's wrong? Noticing that Xiaonan had stopped her footsteps, Wuxia, who had turned his head, slightly wrinkled his brows and puzzledly looked at Xiaonan. He always felt that this woman was weird. If it wasn't for entering Akatsuki to do as the Romans do, he really didn't want to team up with this woman to do mission. Conan's eyes stared at Dustless and suddenly asked, "Who was the mysterious person who stopped you?" Dustless's strength was obvious to all. Even Uzumaki Nagato, who had Rinnegan, was no match for him. Who could stop Dustless? Conan was naturally very curious. However, she was doomed to be disappointed. This has nothing to do with you. After entering Akatsuki, there's no rule that says you have to report your private matters. Dustless glanced at the confused Xiaonan and withdrew his gaze. He turned around and walked away, leaving Xiaonan alone. The mysterious person that Conan was talking about was naturally Uchiha Madara. Perhaps it wasn't him who organized Dustless. Maybe Conan, Uzumaki Nagato, and Yahiko were mercilessly killed many years ago. You're so strong, but so petty. Xiaonan looked at Dustless, who was leaving, and rolled her eyes. She immediately followed Dustless. She and Dustless were now in the Oracle team, so they naturally had to carry out the mission together. On the peak of the mountain, 3 indistinct figures flickered in and out of existence as they stared at the huge village in front of them. Behind them, a strong cold wind whistled past, accompanied by endless sand and dust. It was like a sandstorm, blowing up their robes. Too slow, Dustless. Sasori of the Red Sand turned his head and looked discontentedly at Dustless, who had just arrived. His voice was full of displeasure. He was most annoyed with the kind of person who made him waste time. Sorry. Shrugging his shoulders, Wuxia said to Sasori, Kisame, and Uchiha Itachi apologetically. Hahaha, I'm sorry. He and Conan belonged to the last group to set off. Originally, he wanted to take Conan to go faster, but she firmly disagreed. Dustless also rushed with her, which delayed them for a few hours. It's really a bad place with bad weather. Kisame looked around and frowned slightly after seeing the endless sandstorm. Perhaps he was born as a shark, so he preferred water. It was particularly unsuitable for the dry environment of the rock village. Yes. Itachi nodded. The climate of the rock village was really bad. He immediately looked at Dustless secretly, and a faint ripple appeared in his pupils. He closed his eyes again and began to think. The feeling that Wuxia gave him was not that kind of simple danger. It was like a giant beast hiding in the deep sea. Although it seemed that if you did not provoke it, it would not take the initiative to attack you. It was very gentle. However, no one knew when this giant beast with a bloody mouth would secretly attack you. When the sawtooth opened, it might be the time of life and death. This kind of person was often the most dangerous. It was fine if he didn't take action, but if he did, he would have a 90% chance of succeeding. In other words, Wuxia was the kind of person who was careful and wouldn't take any risks casually. While the few of them were deep in thought, Xiaonan finally arrived. Well, the so-called Oracle team is just SOSO. Seeing Xiaonan come, Sasori of the Red Sand immediately ridiculed her. Because of Xiaonan and Wuxia, the three of them were attacked by the sandstorm for a few hours. Well, let's go find that kid. Wuxia chuckled. Although he didn't care about this so-called Oracle combination, Xiaonan, who was beside him with a pale face, didn't think so. Perhaps in Conan's view, this was Sasori challenging the authority of the former Pain. Let's go find Deidara first. As for other insignificant things, let's talk about it later. Seeing that Xiaonan and Sasori of the Red Sand had signs of a fight, Wuxia spoke to stop them. At the same time, his whole body was covered with a golden luster, like a divine rainbow cutting through the void. He went straight toward the giant village in front of him, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It's still the same terrifying speed, it hasn't changed at all. Looking at the golden rainbow that cut the sky, Hoshigaki Kisame laughed bitterly at himself, and suddenly remembered that Dustless defeated him and Terumi Mei with overwhelming power, and his shark face was particularly complicated. Have you ever fought with him, Kisame? Uchiha Itachi asked curiously, and at the same time, it attracted the attention of Sasori and Conan, because Kisame's strength was obvious to all, and he was known as a humanoid-tailed beast. Hearing this, the bitterness on Kisame's face became more obvious, and he spread his hands, and his face was full of entanglement and helplessness. More than just fighting, if he didn't deliberately let me win, I would have died many years ago. Chapter 181. Kisame's face was full of emotion. If it weren't for Dustless holding back, he would have already died, let alone joining the Akatsuki. He clenched his huge fist tightly, but in the end he couldn't help but let it go. The self-deprecation on his thick face became clearer, and he subconsciously touched the scar on his face. Although it had completely disappeared after many years, there were still some traces left. It was also because of this reason that Kismet Ghost Shark trained himself even more crazily. He dreamed that one day, even if he couldn't surpass Wuxia, he would at least have the power to fight with him. Now, it seemed that the gap between them hadn't narrowed at all. Instead, it had widened a lot. Sure enough, that man is as dangerous and mysterious as the masked man. Hearing this, Itachi's eyes were full of stormy waves, and his face was unnatural. He naturally knew the strength of Kisame, and Dustless's strength was self-evident. Even if he fought against Dustless, he was afraid that it would be like a stone thrown into the sea, and he wouldn't be able to make much of a ripple. What did that guy do in the years after his death? Looking up slightly, looking at the straight beam of light that hadn't dissipated in the sky, Itachi bowed his head and thought. He really couldn't figure out what Dustless was planning in the past few years. However, there was one thing that was certain. During those few years when Dustless's secret disappeared, he was definitely doing secret things that no one knew about. My so-called big brother, what are you doing and what is your plan? Putting down his uneasy heart, Itachi's obsession with Dustless was even stronger than before. His eyes looked indifferently at the void in front of him, and then he disappeared in the direction where Dustless had disappeared. If I can turn those two brothers into my eternal works of art. Seeing that Dustless and Itachi had disappeared, Konan and Kisame also disappeared. Only Sasori, whose eyes were shining, was waiting quietly. He had seen the strength of Dustless and Itachi with his own eyes. If he could make them into puppets, their combat power would definitely double. While his heart was burning, Sasori's blazing expression suddenly froze, and his heart became cold. Uchiha Itachi was already a very difficult and powerful opponent. If Wuxia was added into the mix, for some reason, Sasori suddenly felt that if the two brothers were willing to cooperate with each other, the whole world would be theirs. In the empty lobby, countless iron giants with ghost eyes and fangs could be clearly seen. Their faces were terrible as ghosts, giving the feeling that they were demons from hell. 5 figures stood side by side, and Dustless, who came early, stood in the middle, seemed to be quietly waiting for someone to come. They began to close their eyes. Coming. Along with the voice of Wu Qin, the members of Akatsuki organization opened their eyes one after another, and rather expectantly looked at the distant immature figure, especially Sasori of Akatsuki, but seeing that toddler's shadow, his old face immediately collapsed. Are you kidding me? You want that kid to team up with me? Red Sand Scorpion's eyes immediately darkened. Everyone, including Dustless and Xiao Nan, furrowed their brows without a trace. Although Itachi was only 13.5 years old, at least he seemed to have thoroughly matured, and his childishness had faded, but the kid coming toward him was obviously jumping, giving the feeling that he had not grown up. Don't be impatient, you can't judge a book by its cover, let's wait and see. Glancing faintly at Sasori beside him, Wu Qin calmly opened his mouth. Especially his eagle-like eyes emitted a cold light, which immediately made Sasori swallow back the words he was about to say. This guy gives people a terrible feeling. The corner of his eyes vaguely looked at Dustless, and Sasori said solemnly in his heart, even if some people are strong, there will be a fixed boundary, and Dustless gave him a feeling like a person without any constraints, without any so-called boundary. I would like to see what's so different about him. Raising his cold eyes, Scorpio gloomily looked at the bouncing golden-haired brat in front of him. This brat's appearance coincided with the information. Obviously, he was the so-called Deidara. Soon, the short and tender body stepped into the main hall. Who are you people, without my permission, who let you set foot here? Deidara looked at the unknown strangers in front of him, frowned slightly, and immediately said viciously. These people wore the same clothes, and they obviously belonged to the same force. Thinking of what he had done in the past few years, Deidara's eyes were even more murderous. Because he accepted a lot of terrorist attacks, he offended a lot of people. These people in front of him may be hired killers. Who sent you here? Tell me, or don't even think about leaving this place alive. Looking at Dustless and the other 4 with hostility, Deidara's pupils were emitting a cold light, and at the same time, some white animals could be seen in his hand. They were strange creatures similar to spiders with many long legs. However, Dustless and the other 4 looked at this kid with a smile. This kid doesn't seem to understand the situation. Kisame stared at Deidara, who was full of murderous intent, and said very jokingly. Immediately, he looked at the explosive clay in Deidara's hand, and couldn't help but frown. This kid looks like he will die early. I really don't know what the leader sees in him. Sasori looked at Deidara disdainfully with a sneer on his face. He only thought that this kid came out to be funny, and there was nothing special about him. Especially the white spiders made of explosive clay in Deidara's hand, those ridiculous things like toys, made Sasori snort. In his heart, he had already classified Deidara as a child who had not grown up. Only ordinary children would make this kind of toy. Chapter 182. Deidara looked at Dustless and the other 4 with murderous intent. The murderous intent that broke out of his body filled the empty hall. The cold mist lingered in the air, flashing and appearing, as if thousands of ghosts were screaming. Especially the air that was inhaled into the lungs had a lot of bloody smell. The environment in front of him suddenly turned into the gloomy 18th layer of hell. This kid's murderous intent is quite huge. He has killed so many people at such a young age. I have underestimated him. He withdrew his teasing gaze. Feeling the terrifying murderous intent, Kisame was a little more cautious. It seemed that this kid's young age was not bad. The number of people he had killed was not small, and judging from the scale and density of the murderous intent, many of them belonged to the masters. Take Dustless for example. The scale and density of his murderous intent were incomparably huge. Because he had killed too many people, too many masters had died in the hands of Dustless, which created his murderous intent like a god and a demon. A kid is a kid. Look at the toy in his hand. It's obviously something that only a kid of a few years old would play with. This kid is still playing with mud at such a big age. It's ridiculous. Looking at Deidara with a sneer, Sasori did not hide the contempt in his eyes. At the same time his heart twitched fiercely. He secretly scolded himself for being so unlucky to have such a bitter and brainless teammate. Sasori's sarcasm was fatal to Deidara. He immediately scurried up like a cat whose tail was stepped on. He glared at Sasori with anger in his eyes. This is great art. You 5 idiots. Ordinary people like you can't understand the true meaning of art. You are all laughable and stupid secular people. When he mentioned the art, Deidara began to smile with an unprecedented excitement between his eyebrows. Then he looked at Dustless and the other 4 with disdain. His face was full of contempt, as if he was looking at country bumpkins. He could not arouse the slightest interest. Why do I feel that this kid is so annoying? The corners of Kisame's mouth twitched fiercely. He was speechless. It's a conflict between Sasori of the Red Sand and this little kid, but the 4 of us are involved as well. Ridiculous. Not to mention Sasori, who was already unhappy, Dustless, Conan, Uchiha Itachi, and the others nodded. This boy seems to think too highly of himself. They must let him know how much weight he has. This is a good opportunity. Deidara smiled cruelly, as if he had already seen the miserable scene of the 5 people being blown up into pieces. His eyes flashed with a cold light, as if he had already seen the miserable scene of the 5 people being blown up into pieces. This kid is quite capable. Dustless cast an appreciative look at Deidara when he noticed that his body was suddenly surrounded by the clay centipedes that came out of the ground. Although he had already discovered it, it was undeniable that Deidara's means were quite brilliant. Not only Dustless, but Conan, Itachi, Kisame, and Sasori also had centipedes made of clay wrapped around their bodies. Say who sent you, and I can reluctantly leave you with an intact corpse. Deidara looked coldly at Dustless and the other 3 who were bound, and at the same time, he had already printed with one hand. The killing intent all over his body rose to the limit, and he was about to cause the clay centipedes to explode. I'm really sorry. Dustless looked at Deidara with a smile, deliberately dragging his tone for Deidara to hear, and said softly, bombs are very dangerous. I'm not sure if your artistic attainments can easily control the range of the bomb, and leave us with an intact corpse so. His pitch-black eyes narrowed, and the demonic blood-red 3-tomo jade immediately appeared. For our safety, you'd better be obedient and let us capture you. As Dustless's voice fell, Deidara's world suddenly changed, and he was stunned to find that his body was full of spiders made of explosive clay. Deidara stared blankly at the explosive spiders all over his body. The cold sweat on both sides of his forehead uncontrollably dripped down, and his body shivered uncontrollably. Perhaps when he gave the order to detonate just now, he would have been blown up into nothingness by the clay spiders all over his body. When did this happen? Looking at Dustless and the other 4, Deidara's heart fell to the bottom with despair. It turns out that your art can't resist my genjutsu. It seems that you should join the Akatsuki, which is our organization. Deidara must join the Akatsuki. Faced with such a dilemma, he had no choice but to join. Anyway, this guy was the kind of person who wasn't welcomed in the Rock Village. The villagers of the Rock Village also avoided this crazy bomber. Therefore, the 3rd Tsuchikage Inoki isolated this kid. What if I say I'm not interested? Looking gloomily at Dustless who was standing indifferently, as if everything was under his control, Deidara coldly asked. The corner of his eyes glanced at the clay spiders all over his body, and his expression became colder, and his unwavering tone faintly revealed the taste of death. This is very simple, as long as I take the opportunity to get rid of you before I leave. Kisame took a few steps forward, and the bandage on his back was released, revealing the dense barbs, which were extraordinarily sharp, and it seemed that they could easily pierce steel. It was obvious what kind of miserable end would happen to people who were injured. Kisame's face was full of killing intent, and his murderous intent was more terrifying than the previous dead ale. The murderous intent in his body continued to overflow, and the size of the muscles on his hands also increased, and he stretched out his disgusting big tongue, as if he couldn't wait to devour dead ale. This old man's disciple is not someone you can touch, damn Akatsuki. Under the unprecedented pressure of death, Daidara's will was inevitably shaken. Just when he was about to consider whether to accept the condition of Akatsuki or not, an aged but full of energy roar exploded in the sky, and soon boundless chakra descended. In the lobby where Dustless and the others were, they were immediately surrounded by a white enchantment, isolating the outside matter, and there was a circular light inside the enchantment. Dust release. Primordial world stripping technique. Chapter 183. A white brilliance appeared in front of Wuchen and the others. Itachi and Conan, who was beside Wuchen, dodged the terrible halo one after another. Within the area covered by the white light, everything showed signs of decay, and there were faint signs of collapse. One could feel the power that made one's heart palpitate. The purest form of destruction gave one the feeling that the world had come to an end. Get out of the range of that jutsu. Seeing that Wu Chun was motionless like a sculpture, Xiaonan immediately shouted at him. Although she didn't like him very much, they were now teammates in the same trench. All the grievances and entanglements in the past had disappeared along with it. Don't worry, he can't hurt me. Looking at Conan with a comforting smile, Dustless closed his eyes, and the light around his body became more intense. Like a small sun, it was impossible to open one's eyes. Boom, boom, boom. Everything in the white enchantment was erased, and the empty hall instantly collapsed and tilted, turning into ruins. The ground was destroyed by the destructive force, and a huge deep pit was formed. The soil in the depths of the ground that had not seen the light of day for many years was refurbished, exposing it to the sunlight. What a terrible jutsu! Kisame and Itachi looked at each other, and they could see the shock in each other's eyes, and they were surprised to see a short old man floating in the sky. It seems that one of them was killed. The short old man who could use dust release undoubtedly showed his identity. He was Inoki, the third Hokage of the Rock Village. Although it's a pity that I didn't kill you all at once, it's not difficult to deal with you slowly. Inoki stared at Uchiha Itachi and the others calmly. As for Wuchen, he had ignored him. No one has ever been hit by dust release and not died. Damn Akatsuki, unknowingly, they gathered so many powerful ninjas. It seems that they are all S-class ninjas of various countries. His face suddenly became gloomy. Inoki's expression was no longer as relaxed as before, and instead, it was full of caution. These people weren't simple. Aside from the Akatsuki that was killed before, Inoki was very familiar with the identity and origin of the remaining two. Kirigakure's S-class ninjas, Kisame, and the young man with 3 Tomo Sharingan. Inoki's muddy old eyes fell on Uchiha Itachi, and his eyes flashed with confusion. He seemed to have seen this face sometime in the past. It turned out to be the culprit who destroyed the Uchiha family, Uchiha Itachi, Uchiha Dustless's younger brother. No wonder this old man has a feeling of déjà vu. After staring at Itachi for half a year, Inoki's mind returned, and he remembered the most annoying smile in his life, except for Uchiha Madara, and his old face suddenly collapsed. Especially when Inoki was sleeping and dreaming, he would often dream of that face that he couldn't wait to tear apart. Fortunately, this old man brought the two of them here. This time, I can eradicate you. Inoki's eyes were cold, and his dry cracked mouth had a smug sneer. Soon many ninjas of the Rock Village appeared. The Yambi Jinchuriki and the Gobi Jinchuriki were among them. It seems to be tricky. The scarlet Tomo fell on the 2 Jinchuriki, and Itachi muttered to himself, but his tone didn't seem to care much, and he didn't even put the so-called Jinchuriki in his eyes. Even without Dustless, Itachi, Kisame, Conan, and Sasori could easily defeat the Rock Village. What's more, Dustless is not dead yet. Old man, I didn't expect you to take the initiative to send the Yanbi and the Gobi to me. This saves a lot of trouble. Boom, boom, boom. An ear-piercing roar resounded, and a destructive air wave immediately spread out like a tide. Under the ruins, a straight golden light soared into the sky. His thin body stood in the void, and the blue sky behind him set off Wuxian. Qingzhao stared at Inoki, and the faint smile at the corner of his mouth had a little bit of arrogance. I haven't seen you for many years, but you haven't changed at all, my Sandame Tsuchikage-sama. Looking at the familiar face, Inoki was startled. He was particularly familiar with this frivolous tone, and immediately looked at the cynical and contemptuous smile, and his proud cheeks suddenly stiffened. His old face was like being slapped several times, and his eyes were red, as if he remembered something. He stared at Conan with indignation, and the corner of his mouth was twitching. How is your Akatsuki doing business? Didn't you say that this annoying guy is dead? Bastard, you actually dare to deceive this old man. You really have guts. Inoki's expression was particularly gloomy. He would never forget that when Yahiko came to the rock village to extort hundreds of millions of silver from him, he still acted like he was losing money. What does dustless mean? It means that the Akatsuki didn't complete Inoki's task, and instead he gave away hundreds of millions of silver for nothing. When Yahiko was still alive, Akatsuki's financial situation was really difficult. So Yahiko had no choice but to rob the rich from the rock-hidden village to help the poor. So Yahiko changed his plan to kill Dustless from the rock-hidden village. Little old man, don't you understand? You were slaughtered like a fat sheep. Fearing that Inoki couldn't understand what he meant, Dustless deliberately dragged his voice, and at the same time secretly gave a thumbs up to the dead Yahiko. Fat sheep. Inoki's mouth twitched fiercely, and he almost vomited blood. Although the Akatsuki didn't take Dustless's head to claim the bounty, they cooperated several times, so he didn't have any doubts and gave Yahiko the task reward. Calling him a fat sheep was too flattering. Chapter 184. Inoki was trembling with anger. The word fat sheep was particularly harsh to him. He had always appeared in front of the world as a wise ninja. Often, others were the fat sheep in his eyes. Only this time, the old horse lost its hooves and fell hard, causing him to suffer a double loss. I won't let this go. After extinguishing the fire in his heart, Inoki said calmly, as the saying goes, life is short. He didn't want to be famous in the world, but at the very least, he wanted to completely and cleanly erase the biggest stain in his life. Old man, you've been wrong about one thing from the beginning to the end. We're the ones who won't let this go. The silent Sasori of the Red Sand said coldly. He didn't hide his murderous intent. His blade-like gaze spread like water ripples. Inoki's death had nothing to do with them. This time, they just wanted to take Deladia, Yanbi, and Gobi away. Bastard, get over here. A thunderous roar resounded through the sky. Then a golden rainbow poured down, whistling straight toward Yanbi Jinchuriki Old Rashi. What a fast speed. Yanbi Jinchuriki Old Rashi's pupils suddenly shrank. Fear and disbelief were reflected on his thick face. Even if he was a Jinchuriki, he could feel a strong aura of death coming toward him. Have you been kicked at the speed of light before? But it seems like you haven't. A scornful and lazy voice sounded, giving people a ridiculous feeling as if they were about to fall asleep. Before Old Rashi could react, a dazzling golden light fell from the sky, as if the light was going to blind his eyes. He instinctively closed his eyes. Speed of light kick. Boom. The liquefied golden calf attacked with full force. Out of the beast's keen intuition to danger, Old Rashi immediately used his tailed beast coat to defend his chest. Dense chakra rose all over his body, hoping to use this as a defense. Even so, he was still savagely knocked away by the unparalleled force. Boom. Old Rashi, who was wearing the tailed beast coat, flew out upside down, penetrating the mountain behind him. He whistled out like a cannonball, unstoppable. Boom, boom, boom. On the enormous mountain, a deep crater could be clearly seen. The broken cracks were as messy as a spider web. Old Purple's eyes were lifeless, and his body was stuck in it. There was no doubt that the crater on the mountain was also left behind by him. It seems that one of them has already gone up. If that's the case, your advantage will be even smaller. Looking at the half-dead Yambi Jinchuriki, Kisame's face showed a ferocious smile as he walked straight toward Inoki. Obviously, his target was the Sandaime Tsuchikage. Take the stage? Inoki looked at Kisame with a sneer and said flatly, "The reason why tailed beasts have become the target of all the major countries is because of their powerful strength. If they are so easily dealt with, what do you think this old man spent countless efforts to cultivate Jinchuriki for?" Sure enough, as Inoki's voice fell, the fainted Yambi Jinchuriki old Rashi stood up again. Although he was injured, he wasn't in any danger. Moreover, he had never heard of a Jinchuriki being kicked to death. "I will kill you." Staring at Dustless, the Yambi Jinchuriki said in a cold and hoarse voice. Dustless's kick did cause damage to him, but the recovery ability of a Jinchuriki can't be estimated by common sense. Although he was injured, his combat power was still there. Lava Release, Scorching River Rock Technique. Old Purple opened his mouth and spat out several dark red magma balls. The blazing fireballs were emitting a dark red halo, which was no different from the magma in the depths of the earth. They were full of destruction and quite powerful. They went straight to Wu Chen, intending to swallow him completely. Why struggle? In fact, when you came to the rock village, your fate was already doomed. Wu Chen's temperament was indifferent and tranquil. He looked at the roaring flames without fear. His ink-black eyes were especially bright and calm like water. His pale mouth curved a little, ignoring the roaring magma ball as if it was nothing. Boom boom boom. In the blink of an eye, Dustless was swallowed up by the hot sphere. It resonated like fuel, and his whole body burned with a deep red flame. There was nothing inside the flames. All living things were forbidden, and no living things could survive. This is the end of a pretentious kid. Seeing that he succeeded, Rashi's rough face was filled with a smug smile. He looked disdainfully at Dustless, who was burned to ashes. He looked at the rock ninjas who were in a mess in the distance. When he was about to go to support them, he suddenly felt a cold gaze locked on him. He subconsciously looked back. He suddenly turned around, but behind him was Wu Chen, who was holding a long sword with a face as calm as an ancient well. How is this possible? The sudden situation made Rashi lose his mind for a moment. He didn't hesitate to rush out, but he helplessly found that his left arm was shackled. When he looked up, he saw Dustless's left hand grabbing his left arm. His thin and delicate arm looked fragile, as if it was as weak as a willow branch. As long as he exerted a little force, it would be easily broken. Frankly speaking, Dustless's figure is not burly, just like Uchiha Itachi. His figure is small, and he belongs to the slender type. In this regard, the two brothers are similar. Old Purple struggled with all his might, trying to use the strength of a tailed beast to tear off the arm that was holding him. However, he was helpless to find that the fair and thin arm seemed to have a great strength, binding him tightly and making it difficult for him to break free. At this moment, Dustless gave Rashi the feeling that he was a tailed beast. Under Old Purple's horrified gaze, Wu Chen raised the heavenly sword of gathering clouds in his right hand up high. The cold light reflected from the sword made his soul tremble. Rashi immediately waved his sword mercilessly. Chapter 185. Any creature would be afraid in the face of death. Even if Dustless is invincible now, but if the shadow of death suddenly comes one day, he will also panic. This is human nature. Those who could remain indifferent in the face of death were not human. At least, Dustless thought so. Wu Chen could clearly see the reluctance in Old Purple's eyes. That was a creature's reluctance to part with life and the world. Even though he was over 50 years old, he didn't think he deserved to die. People who are in excessive fear or mental disorder often do unexpected things, such as the four-tailed Jinchuriki in front of him. Poochie. There was a splash of blood in the air, and then Old Purple flashed out. His face was pale, and his eyes were dim and had lost their luster. He looked at the arm in Wu Chen's hand, and his eyes were about to burst. This is really decisive. Looking at the broken arm in his hand, Dustless thoughtfully thought. He didn't expect Old Purple to be so decisive, and cut off his left arm without hesitation. He looked at Old Purple with his burning eyes and nodded slightly. Just now, Old Purple had cut off one of his arms to save his life. It seemed a little rude and brainless, but on second thought, it was actually the only way to escape. Otherwise, the person who was cut in half would be Old Purple's whole body. I'm not a human being for my broken arm. Staring at Wuxian ferociously, Lao Zi roared hysterically in a hoarse voice. His voice seemed to come from his throat, which was extremely horrifying. Combined with his rough old face, it gave people a feeling that he was a demon in the human world, which was especially gloomy. My head is here, come and take it if you have the ability. No nonsense, it's useless to talk. Staring at old Rashi fearlessly, Wuxian said indifferently. Old Rashi's body was constantly erupting tailed beast's chakra, and the corner of his mouth raised into a sneer, looking at him with disdain. You want to unleash the power of a tailed beast by going berserk? You're just a mere four-tailed beast. You're delusional. Foolish. Perceiving the high-density chakra overflowing from Rashi's body, the disdain in Wu Chen's mouth became more obvious. Don't say that this is only borrowing the power of the tailed beast, not the full strength of the Yanbi. Even if the Yanbi Sun Ryukong really broke the seal, it won't change the reality, but save Wu Chen a lot of effort. Lao Purple's body was covered with flame-like armor, and he looked like a magma man. His face was blurred, and he had turned into the amalgamation of chakra. His whole body was filled with negative emotions, including killing, hatred, and destruction. It was obvious that his mind had been completely controlled by the tailed beast in his body. Even the chakra that he spewed out was as hot as magma, burning the ground red. The waving demonic golden tail behind him was clearly visible. Woo woo woo. A beast-like roar came out of Old Purple's throat. The cold beast's roar was like the screams of thousands of ghosts, freezing the flowing air, and making it particularly oppressive. Everyone's heart was covered with a layer of dark clouds. That is, Conan, who was fighting with the Awagakure, felt the chakra wave coming from afar. Her face slightly changed, and her face was filled with horror. In the distant void, a black sphere could be clearly seen. The high-speed rotation of the black energy sphere was very oppressive, and the hurricane that it threw out was also unstoppable. It was like the autumn wind sweeping the fallen leaves. Sand and stones were flying, and the flowing air was crushed and evaporated, forming a large vacuum area. The oxygen was either sucked out or evaporated, and it was impossible to breathe normally. Idiot, you released the Bijadama so carelessly. What do you think I am doing? Staring at Lao Zi, who was gathering Bijadama and ignoring him, Dustless sneered again, and at the same time, his pupils suddenly rotated rapidly and turned into a scarlet five-pointed star Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Amaterasu. Boom boom boom. The giant black sphere exploded with a bang, and a dark red mushroom cloud rose from the endless void. Scorching heat waves from the explosion swept across the world, and a destructive shockwave spread out like a wave, swallowing everything in the surroundings. The surface of the earth was destroyed by a large-scale modification, and it was vulnerable. Old Purple, who was at the center of the incident, was no exception. He was swallowed by the Bijadama at the first moment. His body was almost burnt, and only his weak breathing could be heard. He was lying on the ground motionlessly. He couldn't even do the most basic escape. Obviously, he had lost his consciousness. So only the Gobi is left, and that kid Deidara. Glancing at the half-dead Yanbi on the ground, and looking at Uchiha Itachi, who was fighting the Gobi's Jinchuriki in the distance, Dustless was calm. If he couldn't even deal with the Gobi, then his eyes were really useless. From what the old man said, these people seemed to belong to an organization called Akatsuki. The young Dedale's eyes shone as he spied on the members of the Akatsuki organization. He was deeply moved. Even the woman he looked down on the most before was particularly awe-inspiring when she made her move. She was practically unstoppable. Only 5 people facing the Rock Village, one of the 5 major countries, were not afraid at all. Instead, they were like wolves in a flock of sheep. The ninjas of the Rock Village were almost killed, and they had no power to fight back. Unknowingly, his thoughts had also changed. Maybe joining them would be a good thing. Being able to carry out missions with such a group of powerful people was also a disguised recognition of Dedale. At least, it's much better than living in the rock village that isolated him and regarded him as a monster. What a powerful force. Taking a deep breath, looking at Dustless's blood-red eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, Deidara's heart was deeply touched, and his voice was trembling. The powerful eye power that seemed to pierce his soul made him inevitably daydream. Tsukuyomi. With Uchiha Itachi's voice, the gobi suddenly stopped moving, and the chakra on his body disappeared, and he was as quiet as a kitten. Chapter 186. The ability of Sharingan is well known all over the world, and to some extent, it's the natural enemy of Bijou. Perfect Jinchuriki is okay. For example, Killer Bee, who was killed by Dustless, the power of Sharingan is not enough to control him, because Bijou and Jinchuriki's chakra can interfere with each other, and can't be controlled. But the Yambi Jinchuriki and the Gobi Jinchuriki in front of him didn't completely control their Bijou. Although it's a bit troublesome for them to control Sharingan, it's not impossible. It seems that it's completely done. Looking at the unconscious Yambi Jinchuriki on the ground, and the Gobi Jinchuriki that was controlled by Itachi, Dustless then grabbed the dying Rashi with one hand and flew towards Konan and the others. Looking around, the entire battlefield was bloody, and the ground was forcibly changed. Without exception, all the ninjas of the rock village were dead. There's no need to fight anymore, Kisame. Uchiha Itachi also grabbed the Gobi Jinchuriki in his hand. It seemed that his method was much gentler. He just used genjutsu to make him faint. Compared to Dustless, who burned Rashi's body, Itachi was undoubtedly much kinder. Old man, I'll deal with you later. Kisame stared at Inoki fiercely, and then he pulled back and looked at Dustless and the others, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Kisame's Akatsuki uniform has been completely destroyed by the fierce fight, and there are even many subtle wounds on his body. It's not because he's too weak, it's because Inoki's strength is too terrifying, and the almost invincible dust release can't be touched. Kisame. Looking at Deidara, who was still in a daze in the distance, Dustless cast a glance at Kisame. I know. Kisame nodded, and immediately rushed out. Almost in the blink of an eye, he came to Deidara's side and picked him up like a rabbit. Let me go, brother shark. Feeling that his body had lost gravity and was caught in the air, Dedale immediately roared at the Kisame ghost shark. At the same time, he bared his fangs and brandished his claws at the Kisame ghost shark. However, because his hands were too short, he couldn't touch the Kisame ghost shark. I will definitely kill you, you bastard. Glaring at Kisame, the ferocious look in his words was like that of a caged beast, which proved that Dedale wasn't joking. You. He waved his hand and snatched the kunai from Deidara's hand. Then he easily twisted it into a fried dough twist and threw it on the ground in disdain. He sneered at Deidara and said with contempt, "If it weren't for the order of the organization, I would have killed you right now. Ignorant brat, there should be a limit even if you're conceited." Kisame looked at Deidara with disdain. If it weren't for Pain's order, he would have definitely pinched this arrogant brat to death. Itachi is only 1 year older than you, how can the gap be so big? Kisame sighed in his heart, and began to sympathize with Sasori of the Red Sand, who would team up with Deidara in the future. Compared with Itachi, who never showed his emotions, Deidara in front of him was really far worse. Whether in terms of IQ or strength, there was a huge gap between him and Itachi. Seeing that his beloved disciple was caught by Kisame, Inoki's ugly face became even more ugly. His old arms quickly and skillfully printed, and a huge amount of chakra erupted from his body. It seemed that this technique wasn't simple. Earth release. Old man, are you sure you want to fight? Dustless suddenly interrupted Inoki, and his chakra stopped flowing. At this point, the rock village was already defeated. The Yambi Jinchuriki and the Gobi Jinchuriki have been caught. And now the rock village only has Inoki, and there are still 5 of them. It's almost a one-sided situation. Even if the entire rock village is slaughtered today, Inoki can only watch. Uchiha Dustless, what is your purpose for capturing the tailed beast? Anoki suppressed the fire in his heart and asked gloomily. The murderous aura emitted from his pupils was like a knife, which made people shudder with fear. He faintly had a commanding tone. At the same time, he began to think about Akatsuki's purpose of robbing the beast. Old man, you don't seem to understand the situation. Hearing Anoki's commanding tone, Dustless slightly frowned and sneered. Purpose? We are not the ninjas of the rock village. You are the so-called Tsuchikage, and you don't seem to be qualified to order us. Even if this is the rock village, do you think you can stop us? Wu Chun sneered, attacking Anoki mercilessly. His voice was deliberately filled with chakra, lingering in the sky for a long time without dispersing. You. Anoki's mouth twitched, and his old face became even more ugly. Indeed, as Dustless said, even if Dustless and the other four went away, he couldn't stop them. As for collecting the tailed beast, speaking of this, Dustless smirked and said, of course it's for world peace. What Dust said was true. Whether it was during Yahiko's period, Uzumaki Nagato's period, or later, Uchiha Obito's period, they all had the most essential purpose, world peace, including Uchiha Madara's infinite Tsukuyomi, which was actually yearning for peace. However, these words were particularly harsh in Anoki's ears. Ridiculous, in my opinion. You are the most direct cause of the world's turmoil. Anoki immediately sneered. If Dustless and Akatsuki were chasing the so-called peace, then the 5 major powers and other ninja villages were the root of the scourge of the world. In other words, he was an out-and-out great villain. Chapter 187. Dustless naturally left safe and sound. It's not that Anoki didn't want to stop them, but he didn't have the ability to do so. In this world, the law of the jungle is still the law of the jungle. Especially a mercenary organization like the Akatsuki, they don't have any morals at all. For them, as long as they pay enough, even if they have to destroy one of the 5 major countries, as long as they pay enough, they will agree. Damn Akatsuki, do you think this is over? Stop dreaming. On the vast plain, Anoki's eyes widened as he looked at the departing figures with a cold smile on his face. If the Akatsuki thought that he was helpless, then they really underestimated him. Kitsuchi. Anoki looked at his son with a cold face and said, I have a secret letter. You will personally send it to the Cloud Village, asking them to join forces to deal with the Akatsuki. Anoki sneered. Although colluding with the Cloud Village is tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin, there is no other way. If he wants to take back his Jinchuriki and his apprentice Deidara, he can only collude with other villages. The 5 rebellious ninjas are obviously S-class. Uchiha Wu and Uchiha Itachi are even stronger than the Bijou. But we don't have any bargaining chips. It's impossible to gain something without risking anything, father. Kitsuchi smiled bitterly. It's obviously impossible to pull the cloud into the water without paying a price, especially dealing with the Akatsuki, a powerful enemy that may cause the destruction of the village. Moreover, the 3rd Reikage died under the siege of the rock village. Anoki's expression suddenly stiffened. He realized that the 3rd Reikage was killed by him a few years ago. And now the 4th Reikage is the son of the 3rd Reikage. Maybe the 4th Reikage will kill his son to vent his anger. Although under the absolute benefits, the grievances between the 2 sides can disappear, and they can cooperate tacitly, but there is a saying that the hatred of killing one's father is irreconcilable, and it's not easy to let go. Then let's go to Konoha to cooperate. The hesitation in his eyes disappeared, and Anoki's heart suddenly became clear. Maybe the Sandaime, who enjoys peace, won't agree to his conditions, but he has heard about the radical figure of the pro-war faction, Shimura Danzo. This is a good idea. Uchiha Itachi and Uchiha Dustless are the traitors of Konoha. Asking them to deal with the Akatsuki is not impossible. Kitsuchi's eyes lit up, and he agreed with Anoki's proposal. The only thing he was worried about was that Sandaime, who was addicted to peace, would definitely refuse this proposal. But Sarutobi won't agree. His hot-blooded heart has been obliterated. It's impossible for him to agree to this absurd proposal. After thinking about it for a while, Kitsuchi said in a deep voice. The Sandaime was a stubborn old man, and he would never push Konoha into a war. Although Shimura Danzo was in control of Root, which was not inferior to the Umbu, the Kyuubi's sudden riot a few days ago destroyed Root's base. Don't worry, Kitsuchi, just tell Shimura Danzo the news. Waving his hand, Inoki said with great confidence. Shimura Danzo was the most insidious and cunning person in Konoha. As long as he told him about the alliance to deal with the Akatsuki, he wouldn't care about anything else. If he really wants to form an alliance, even if he doesn't have the manpower, he will create manpower. As for the specifics, it's Shimura Danzo's business. As long as he has the heart, it doesn't matter whether he has the manpower or not. That night, Inoki sent people to Konoha overnight and got in touch with Shimura Danzo. Unsurprisingly, when he mentioned that Uchiha Dustless was also in the Akatsuki, the old man did indeed agree to work with the Rock Village. However, what made Inoki speechless was that although Shimura Danzo agreed to deal with the Akatsuki, he didn't give a specific time, he just said, "Let's talk about it later," which made Inoki vomit blood. Feeling helpless, Inoki could only endure. At the same time, he didn't forget to secretly send ninjas to contact the other major countries, hoping to form a temporary alliance to deal with the Akatsuki. However, the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. Although Inoki predicted that all countries would be willing to form an alliance, the fact was the opposite. No country agreed. He was busy for a few days and didn't even get a fart, which made him particularly gloomy. The reason why they rejected Inoki was that all countries had just suffered the devastation of the Third World War. Whether it was their economic or military strength, they were greatly reduced, and it was simply not enough to cope with other wars. The members of Akatsuki organization might not be many, but without exception, all of them were the strongest ninjas whose strength had reached S rank. Even if they had the intention to destroy Akatsuki, they would not have the strength to do so. In addition, the ninjas of the four major countries also had doubts and scruples about the Rock Hidden Village. Inoki was famous in the world for his foresight. Maybe the Rock Hidden Village dug a hole for them to jump in. After knowing what happened, Inoki beat his chest and stomped his feet. He secretly cursed the ninjas of the four major countries for being idiots. They don't know what is righteous, and they don't have a long-term vision. The threat of the Akatsuki is far greater than the ordinary ninja village. These organizations are composed of ninjas, like sharks in the deep sea. Their motives are unknown. From the current situation, they are coming for the tailed beasts, and any village with tailed beasts may be the target of their attack. Although he was unhappy, Inoki couldn't do anything. In fact, the situation of the Rock Hidden Village was not much better, and dealing with the Akatsuki was just a matter of words. To Inoki's relief, Shimura Danzo's position was firm, and all the countries began to pay attention to this organization lurking in the dark world, and began to inquire about all the information about the Akatsuki. At this moment, inside the Akatsuki, it was a different scene. All the members gathered again. The only difference is that this gathering was different from the past. It was filled with an unprecedented smell of gunpowder. The atmosphere was particularly tense. Chapter 188. Deidara was holding countless clay spiders in his hand. His expression and meaning were quite real. These small spiders made of explosive clay were vivid and lifelike, giving people a feeling as if they were living things. If placed in the 3D world of Dustless's previous life, then Deidara could be said to be a top-notch art master. However, in the eyes of Akatsuki, these little things were really annoying and funny, especially Sasori, who was about to form a team with Deidara. He directly flew into a rage, wishing he could slap Deidara flying. "This is my art. Can you country bumpkins who haven't seen the world understand?" Looking at the small clay spiders in his hand complacently, and looking at the speechless Akatsuki people, Deidara's eyes shone, and he explained in a loud voice. "The so-called art. Bullshit art." Seeing Deidara beaming with joy and proclaiming his own artistic attainments, bewitching people's hearts, Sasori had no choice but to stand up to maintain the face of this art master, rudely interrupting Deidara's speech. "True art is the pursuit of eternal beauty. The splendor of an instant has no actual name, just like a flash in the pan, meaningless. Even if it blooms the most beautiful afterglow in an instant, after all, it is not worth mentioning in the long river of time. Only eternal beauty is an eternal immortal existence." Sasori of the Red Sand educated Deidara, like an old man. His eloquence flowed like a torrent, and that voice full of magic seemed to be able to penetrate the soul of human, scaring all the elders of Akatsuki organization. It seems very profound. Kisame tried his best to make an appearance of understanding, but his face was full of doubt betrayed him. Although he was very good at thinking, but this kind of artistic point of view, he really didn't understand. Especially that expression of, "I, your father, understand your meaning very well," made Dustless unable to restrain himself from laughing. Sasori explained each and every word, and at the same time didn't forget to ferociously glare at Deidara. Originally, he was the #1 art master of Akatsuki organization, but as a result, this brat Deidara began to bewitch people, proclaiming his instant art. How could Sasori not be angry? Eternal art is art? That's nonsense. Deidara looked at Sasori with disdain. He turned a deaf ear to Sasori's ferocious gaze. His voice was exceptionally loud and resounded throughout the sky. The art of instant beauty is far superior to the so-called eternal beauty. The reason why you pursue the art of eternity is because of the fear that living beings have when facing the river of time. When the things around you leave you, you will feel endless loneliness in your heart. At the same time, you will have the mentality of pursuing eternity. Deidara shook his head and looked at Sasori with a hopeless look. He said contemptuously, "A mere mortal who can't even get rid of the secular heart dares to talk about what art is. Ridiculous." Deidara was like a dazzling star. His sharp eyes shone brightly as he gazed at the faces of the members of Akatsuki organization. In an instant, he felt that these people were the most important audience in his life. Deidara swore in his heart that he would use his lifetime understanding of art to show off these eyesores in front of him, who did not know what art was. So-called art shouldn't pursue eternal existence. Only the most dazzling splendor of a lifetime can be released in the afterglow of an instant. This is the ultimate path of art. Art. Stop the nonsense of a bastard. Only eternity. Seeing this scene, Dustless didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was speechless as he looked at the two masters of art arguing with each other about the true meaning of art. He was particularly tangled. He subconsciously looked around. The expressions of the members of Akatsuki organization were quite different. The two zombie combination of Haiden and Kakuzu were obviously fooled. No matter whose art it was, they would nod and feel that it was reasonable. As for Pain, he still had a face of everything under the sun. Dustless actually knew that the one who didn't understand the most was this kid who liked to solve everything by force. What's the news about the other-tailed beasts? Absolutely. Glancing at Deidara and Sasori, who were still arguing with each other, Pain was too lazy to talk nonsense. It was good to let this new combination that was about to be born communicate with each other. Hearing this, Zetsu first glanced at Dustless vaguely. After seeing that the latter's expression was normal, he said, "Kyubi is still in Konoha for the time being. The specific whereabouts of Hachibi are unknown. The Nanabai Jinchuriki is still in Waterfall Village. The Nibi Jinchuriki is still in Cloud Village. The Ichibi Jinchuriki is a kid named Gara. As for the other beasts, they are in a wild state." Zetsu naturally knew that the Hachibi was captured by Dustless. Now that Dustless didn't mean to hand over the Hachibi, he was too lazy to talk nonsense. He believed that when the day comes, Dustless will take out the bijou. In fact, the Hachibi was subdued by Dustless many years ago, and became his summon beast. Only Zetsu and Madara knew about it. The Akatsuki currently has only two-tailed beasts, the Yambi and the Gobi that were previously captured. As for the Kyubi's attribute chakra, it has been pulled out from the Geto Mazo by Obito. According to him, this is to prevent Uzumaki Nagato from using the Kyubi's power. For the time being, capture the other-tailed beasts in a wild state. As for those Jinchuriki, let them live for a few more years. After pondering for a while, Pain said in a deep voice. Samsara's eyes flashed with a dangerous cold light, with monstrous killing intent. Anoki, this little old man, dared to announce the news of the Akatsuki to the world, which also greatly limited their actions. Although they couldn't directly attack the Akatsuki due to the Third World War, the recovery ability of these superpowers is extremely fast. I am afraid that it won't take long for them to completely recover their strength. At that time, there is no need to think about it. They will definitely not let the Akatsuki go easily. Only when these ferocious tigers are licking their blood and healing their wounds, they can capture other wild beasts as soon as possible. As for the Jinchuriki of the shinobi village, there is no need to provoke them for the time being. All the Jinchuriki are the focus of protection. If they are so unscrupulous, it will inevitably arouse the backlash of these superpowers. At that time, when everyone is in danger, they may really form a special alliance against the Akatsuki. Chapter 189. The members of Akatsuki organization were all capable people from all walks of life. They were either powerful or had special abilities. For example, the immortal Haiden and Kakuzu, the absolute power combination of Itachi and Kisame, the oracle combination of Dustless and Conan, and the artistic combination that was about to be formed, all represented the different abilities of each other. Zetsu was the only independent existence in the Akatsuki, and he was solely responsible for the important task of intelligence. The intelligence was spread all over the world. Now that he said that the whereabouts of the Hachibi were unknown, how could Pain turn a deaf ear to it? He looked at Zetsu with doubt. The Hachibi is indeed untraceable. I have almost searched all over the world, but I couldn't find the Hachibi. Zetsu smiled bitterly, and his appearance was extremely realistic. He didn't look like he was lying. At the same time, he couldn't help but curse Dustless for not handing over the Hachibi. Especially Black Zetsu. He was really afraid that Pain would use the ability of Rinnegan to search his memory. Either the Hachibi has been killed or, the silent Uchiha Itachi opened his mouth, and his clear eyes revealed the light of wisdom as he said in a deep voice, "It has been captured and turned into a special existence similar to a psychic beast." Itachi hit the nail on the head and immediately pointed out the problem. It is indeed possible. Pain heard this and nodded. The bijou was very powerful for the world, and chakra was almost infinite. It had the absolute strength to destroy the world, and was almost invincible in the world. It was an existence that couldn't be resisted, but it also varied from person to person. Not to mention the Hachibi, even the Kyubi would only have a dead end. Therefore, it sounded a bit shocking that the Hachibi was killed or captured by someone. After carefully thinking about it, it wasn't impossible. After all, there were many strong people in the world. Don't worry about the Hachibi for the time being, let's deal with the other bijou first. Waving his hand, Pain no longer worried about this issue. He wasn't the kind of person who liked to waste time. Instead of thinking about this kind of unanswered question, it was better to do something meaningful. The current wild bijou is the Rokubi who betrayed the mist not long ago. After the fall of Yagura, the Sambai is also wild, and the Nanabai of the waterfall village. Speaking of this, Zetsu's voice hesitated. A few years ago, Obito used his Sharingan to control Yagura, and carried out a bloody massacre. After that, he was overthrown by the ninjas led by Terumi Mei. Yagura was also killed, and Sambai was naturally in a wild state. Leave Waterfall Village's Jinchuriki to me and Haiden. I know that Jinchuriki. Kakuzu's oily green eyes flashed with ruthless radiance. He suddenly recalled that little girl of the past, and the hesitation in his eyes was quickly replaced by determination. Ever since he joined Akatsuki, the last bit of benevolence in his heart was thoroughly obliterated. It's not difficult to see that Kakuzu has bet everything on Akatsuki, and everything in the past has disappeared. Even if the Nanabai's Jinchuriki girl has a good relationship with him, Kakuzu swore that he won't let her go easily. The reason is that he gave everything to Waterfall Village, but Waterfall Village trampled on his contribution and made it worthless. Everyone has countless stories behind them. The sharp-eyed Dustless naturally saw Kakuzu's old face, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Everyone in the Akatsuki organization has countless sorrows and unbearable pasts, and Uchiha Madara is no exception. Leave the Rokubi to me and Itachi. I know the hiding place of that monster, and I'm familiar with the Mist Village. I also know Yugao's Jinchuriki. Kisame said in a deep voice. He didn't have a good impression of the Mist Village, let alone catching a bijou. Even if they asked him to plot against his former teammate, he wouldn't hesitate to raise his butcher's knife. No problem. Itachi's deep and clear eyes opened as he said faintly. He didn't care that the opponent was a bijou. They had absolute confidence in taking down the so-called bijou, especially Itachi and Kisame. The former was both intelligent and brave, and the latter was also a brave existence. Even if they were besieged by the mist, they could leave safely. As for the remaining Sanbai, Pain looked at Dustless and Conan. Obviously, he wanted to give this task to them. The ARC group in the distance was obviously still in a quarrel. It was definitely unrealistic to give this task to them. And Deidara was still very young. He didn't have the ability to catch the Sanbai. Leave it to me. Xiaonan took a step forward, completely ignoring whether Wu Chen agreed or not. She took it for granted and was unusually decisive. She completely and simply ignored Wu Chen's existence. No problem. Glancing at the indifferent Conan, Dustless was too lazy to argue with her. At the same time, he began to calculate in his heart. In a few years, Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke will graduate from the Ninja Academy. From then on, it will directly open the curtain of the era. 3 days later, in the mist village of the Land of Water, staring at the giant village shrouded in mist in the distance, Dustless's heart was inevitably agitated, and he couldn't help but recall the enchanting girl from a few years ago. Now that he hasn't seen her for a few years, Terumi May has become a Mizukichi, and this woman is quite capable. She took care of the mist village in an orderly manner. It can be said that the village recovered the fastest after the 3 wars. It's really unpredictable. Let's go, Conan. After a few sighs, Dustless began to walk to the hiding place of the Sanbai provided by Zetsu. At the same time, the cold light in his eyes gathered more and more. As Zetsu said, the current Sanbai was just in a pure wild state, and no one cared about its existence. As long as he used the power of the Sharingan to bind it, there would be no problem. The only difference was that the original Sanbai was defeated by Deidara and Sasori, but now it's Conan and Dustless's turn to tame it in advance. Chapter 190. There was no doubt about his ability to investigate. His clones were all over the world. There was almost nothing he didn't know. He could even ruthlessly say that as long as the kid wanted to, he would definitely know which bathhouse the Sandame was spying on today, and which girl's figure he was looking at with this information. Dustless and Conan didn't waste any time, and went straight to the hiding place of the Sanbai. Raising his gaze slightly, his sharp eagle-like gaze swept straight ahead. His oppressive gaze pierced through the layers of thick fog, taking in the entire scene in front of him. After careful observation, a puzzled expression emerged on Wu Chen's face. Strange. The mist ninjas seemed to be capturing the Sanbai. Frowning slightly, Dustless muttered to himself. He still remembered that since the fall of Yagura, Sanbai was in a natural wild state. No one cared whether he was alive or dead. He was left alone in the sea. Sanbai also hid in the deep sea. During this period, he didn't do anything bad. It seems that all the countries are on guard against us. The mist spent a lot of effort to capture the Sanbai just to prevent us from capturing the Sanbai. Suddenly, Dustless remembered that the old man Inoki exposed Akatsuki a few days ago. He was afraid that the whole world was on guard against the tailed beast in his village. Now catching Sanbai was also expected. Then we can only send them all to heaven. Xiaonan's eyes flashed with hostility when she heard this. Her petite figure was filled with a chill, just like a fallen angel from hell. Her entire body was embellished with a sense of coldness. Dustless glanced at Conan and shook his head. There was no need to fight the mist. Especially with the current situation, he wasn't sure if May could seal the Sanbai, especially since there was no suitable Jinchuriki. A Jinchuriki wasn't something that could be pulled in casually. Gradually approaching the deep sea where the Sanbai lived, a large number of mist ninjas gathered here. Everyone's sight was focused on the tall May. Although the distance between Dustless and May was quite far, his dynamic vision was excellent. He could still see the enchanting figure. I haven't seen you for a few years, but you're getting prettier. His eyes swept over May's body, but his expression was as calm as water. His family's tigress, Otsutsuki Haruo, wasn't worse than Mei. The former was as cold as an iceberg and belonged to the arrogant type. Mei had a seductive personality. They were two completely opposite existences. Dustless was also purely admiring. His heart had settled down for several years. He had long been as steady as Mount Tai and as calm as autumn water. I didn't see your nature as a pervert. Xiaonan turned her head and looked at Wu Chen with a sneer. She kept a distance from Wu Chen. Her watery eyes were full of disdain. She didn't expect Wu Chen to have such an attribute. I haven't seen you for a few years, but you... Wu Chen didn't get angry but laughed when he heard that. He deliberately looked around Xiaonan's body, and then his eyes stopped on Xiaonan's body. Suddenly, a teasing smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. His words made Xiaonan almost vomit blood. You've aged a lot, Conan. Fearing that Xiaonan deliberately couldn't hear that he was ridiculing him, Wu Chen deliberately dragged out his intonation. His voice was strange, giving people a kind of nondescript feeling. Conan's mouth twitched fiercely. Although she hid it very well and tried to keep her calm, Dustless still felt that his body was locked by a cold murderous aura. Whoa! At this moment, the cries of wild beasts resounded through the endless sky. Huge ripples suddenly appeared on the calm surface of the water. The impact of the waves that could topple mountains and overturn seas also spread out in all directions. As far as the eye could see, the originally calm surface of the sea gradually revealed a gigantic beast. It was shaped like a tortoise, and there were uneven layers of sharp protrusions on its back. It looked exceptionally tough, as if it was the strongest defense that could not be broken through. The ferocious beast's face looked uncertain as it looked at the surrounding mist village. Isabo's eyes were cold and murderous, and his body was full of powerful chakra waves. All tailed beasts hated humans, and Ichibi Takubi were no exception. Isabu opened his mouth and spat out a black energy ball. Chakra continued to surge out of his body, increasing his power. The giant Bijidama continued to expand in size, and the constant compression of power made everyone's face change, especially Mei. As the fifth Mizukage of the Mist Village, she naturally knew the horror of tailed beasts better than these ordinary ninjas. Hurry up and evacuate. Without thinking, Mei ordered the mist ninjas to retreat quickly. The power of Bijidama wasn't something that anyone could easily resist. Even if she was a Mizukage, she might not be able to escape. She knows when to retreat. Dustless, who was secretly watching, nodded slightly. The power of Bijidama couldn't be contaminated by ordinary ninjas. Just a light touch and they would be crushed to pieces. Especially now that Isabu didn't hold back at all. Terumi Mei knew that the number of people couldn't change the reality. Ordering the mist ninjas to retreat was the only way I could do. It seems that we don't need to do anything. Looking at the scattered ninjas, Conan whispered. She immediately had a look of "it's none of my business." She quietly waited for the upcoming one-sided massacre. Isabu is not that woman's opponent. Dustless faintly glanced at Conan and shook his head. Isabu might be able to scare others, but it wasn't enough to scare a strong woman like Mei. If he didn't make a move, Isabu would definitely be killed by Mei. Since you are about to be locked in a cage, I will reluctantly help you and save you from physical pain. Staring at the giant Bijidama, Dustless's mouth raised a touch of coldness, and his eyes began to twist sharply. The evil eye power made Conan beside him tremble uncomfortably. The Scarlet Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was particularly terrifying, and even Conan could vaguely see the afterglow of blood on Dustless's body. Chapter 191. Conan looked at the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan in Dustless's eyes. She could feel that the power in Dustless's left and right eyes had a qualitative improvement. It was completely different from the time when he fought her, Yahiko, and Nagato. Although it's exactly the same as the original Sharingan, there is a gap in the strength of the eyes. Conan's beautiful eyes stared at the scarlet eyes, and she couldn't help but worry secretly. She was afraid that Dustless would suddenly attack one day, and Pain wouldn't have any means to catch him, because the fluctuations in the scarlet eyes weren't something that Nagato could resist at all. She even said that there was a dimension of surprise. and her eyes unconsciously looked at Dustless's handsome face, trying to see his purpose. It's actually very simple to deal with this kind of beast that can't resist the Sharingan. There's no need to face it head-on. Seeing Conan looking at him in a daze, Dustless just smiled, and then his eyes seemed to have a bloody light in them. In the next second, the raging sea instantly returned to calm, and the black energy ball in the mouth of the Sambai stopped growing, and the three thick tails that were constantly slapping the water also returned to calm, as if nothing happened on the water surface. Isabu's eyes were emotionless, empty and gray, and instantly became like a docile kitten, and its majestic hostility disappeared, and it obediently lay on the water surface. Only the big eyes of the Sambai faintly showed the same five-pointed star as Dustless's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. This is... Terumi Mei's pretty face looked at the well-behaved Sambai, and her enchanting face was full of disbelief, and her seductive little mouth turned into an O shape. It was the first time in her life that she saw a well-behaved bijou. Little South America's eyes widened, and she also looked at the Sambai that was as well-behaved as a child in an instant, and her heart began to fluctuate violently. What kind of level has this guy's eyes reached? He just glanced at the Sambai carelessly, and her pretty face was heavy, and her chest seemed to be pressed by 1,000 pounds of stone, making her almost suffocated and cold all over. She couldn't help but think about Dustless's motives and purposes. With his unprecedented strength, he was willing to join the Akatsuki organization and submit to pain. It was obviously impossible for him to have no purpose. While Conan was thinking, suddenly felt that her cold little hand was grabbed by a pair of hot hands, and her heart trembled fiercely. Let's go. Dustless didn't pay attention to Conan's expression. Golden Luo. The two disappeared as if they crossed thousands of space in an instant, and they came to the beach in the blink of an eye. Stared at the Sei's serene look, Dustless frowned. Its eyebrows. Staring at the peaceful look, S's. And disappeared. Conan. His eyes looked at the void in front of him indifferently. Dustless's face was expressionless. He could clearly see the sky in front of him. Terumi Mei, this clever little girl, intended to take advantage of this opportunity to completely tame the Sambai. I understand. Her cold eyes were like an eagle's, jumping with cold light, with endless killing intent. She stared at Terumi Mei, who was rushing towards the three. Her body suddenly showed signs of folding paper, and a huge pair of wings suddenly extended from her back. Conan floated to the sky with this force. She flew straight towards Terumi Mei. I'm looking forward to this battle. Seeing that Conan left, Dustless chuckled slightly. Who is stronger and who is weaker? I'm afraid that a fierce battle is inevitable. He retracted his gaze, looked at the motionless Sambai, and walked towards it. Damn brat. Conan, who was floating in the sky, had a pale face, and her pretty face was obviously still red. Her fists were clenched tightly, and a lot of sweat could be seen. Compared with her usual dignified and indifferent appearance, the difference was particularly big. Xiaonan didn't have time to react to Wu Chen's sneak attack just now. When she came back to her senses, it was already too late. She had already been brought to the beach not far from Sambai by that abnormal speed. This allowed Dustless to take advantage of her. In fact, Dustless didn't have any other thoughts in his mind. He simply wanted to complete the task quickly. He instinctively grabbed Conan's soft hand. As for the feeling of ecstasy, he didn't savor it. You used to be a part of the Jubi, but now you're really fragile. Looking at the Sambai in front of him who was controlled by him, Dustless shook his head. He was not optimistic about these bijou. The bijou in the eyes of normal people, for some people such as Uchiha Madara and Hashirama, they were just small pets that could be easily pinched. Boom, boom, boom. An ear-piercing roar suddenly sounded. He looked up and saw a huge mushroom cloud rising in the distant sky. The dark smoke was hanging in the sky. The impact of the explosion set off a huge wave toward Wu Chen and Sambai. The strong hurricane blew his clothes. These two girls aren't easy to deal with. Looking at the two beautiful figures who had already fought in the distance, Dustless looked at them with interest. At the same time, he looked at the monstrous wave that was attacking them. He was sure that Conan did this deliberately. Her vengeful heart is really strong. Dustless looked at the wave that was more than 10 meters high coming toward him, and the sambai without fear. He shook his head slightly, and his left eye suddenly turned into Rinnegan, and a majestic repulsion spread out. Super Shinra Tensei. Boom, boom, boom. With Dustless and the sambai as the center, the sea suddenly sank, and an irresistible wave swallowed the sea within a few kilometers. Everything that touched this repulsion disappeared with the wind. The wave that was more than 10 meters high before was also flattened and disappeared. The cloudy sky suddenly became clear. With Rinnegan, Dustless could be said to have interpreted the power to the limit. Chapter 192. The detonation talisman fell into the sea, causing countless chain reactions. It was like the end of the world. In an instant, the entire sea was detonated. The entire sky turned fiery red, and the fire burned dozens of meters high. Boom, boom, boom. The sea was shrouded in explosions for a few minutes. The deafening roar roared unscrupulously in the sky. Everyone, including Dustless, was shocked. The power condensed by thousands of detonation talismans was something no one could understand. Did she really kill Terumi Mei? Looking at the scene of the battle in the distance, Dustless took a deep breath. Looking at the scale of the explosion, even if Terumi Mei was really killed by Conan, Dustless would still be suspicious. There was no one on the quiet sea, only Conan in the sky. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The surface of the sea under his feet suddenly trembled, and a vast ripple appeared. Feeling the strangeness in the depths of the river, Dustless's eyes subconsciously looked underwater. His sharp eyes penetrated the heavy barriers, and the hazy figure under the water suddenly came into view. There was no doubt that the beautiful figure in the depths of the water was naturally Terumi Mei, but Dustless turned his head unnaturally, because at this time, Terumi Mei was quite embarrassed. Not to mention that her clothes were soaked. Although she dove into the depths of the sea to avoid the explosion, her clothes were burned. The left half of her body was exposed to the outside. The snow-white skin made people's heart flutter, and the clothes in front of her were also burned away. With Terumi Mei's vigorous movements, you can see the inside of her body. Conan didn't do this on purpose, right? The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely. Dustless didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was no wonder that Dustless thought so. The exposed parts of Terumi Mei's body belonged to the most mysterious type. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was intentional. Bang, bang, bang. Suddenly, several thick water pillars shot out from the calm sea surface, piercing towards Xiao Nan in the sky like sharp barbs. The tips of the water droplets froze into ice, seeming as if they were going to poke holes in Xiao Nan's body. It could be seen that in the previous battle, Terumi Mei's heart was also filled with anger, especially when the private parts of her body were exposed. How could she not be angry? However, she didn't know that Dustless was secretly observing her. Otherwise, Terumi Mei would have gone completely berserk. Child's play, this kind of move can't shake me. Xiao Nan looked coldly at the water droplet that was charging at her. Her lips were filled with coldness. She casually waved her hand, and countless explosive talismans fell from her body. She controlled the timing perfectly. The moment the huge water droplet was about to pierce through Xiao Nan, it exploded with a bang. Bang, bang, bang. Tens of water columns were instantly blasted into pieces. The water splashed in the air and fell back to the ground. The sparkling water droplets reflected Xiao Nan's dark shadow like mirrors. Xiao Nan was shocked, and she looked at the black shadow reflected by the water droplets with an ugly face. Worthy of being the fifth Mizukichi. She hid herself in the water column in advance to avoid the impact of the explosive talismans, and looked for a powerful opportunity to sneak attack. Xiao Nan thought secretly. Although she was surprised by Terumi Mei's combat awareness and skills, she was still able to deal with Terumi Mei. Her body was like a broken mirror, and countless folds appeared again. Obviously, Xiao Nan had realized the existence of Terumi Mei behind her. Want to escape? It's not that easy. Terumi Mei's mouth raised a cold smile, and her gem-like pupils emitted a sharp cold light. Her thin red lips gently opened, and a clay-colored mist was spat out. Lava release, melting monster technique. The sand-colored solution instantly wrapped Xiaonan, and the unknown solution was rapidly sticky and corrosive, eroding Xiaonan's body. It seems to be an unknown Kekiai Genkai, and its power is so good. Her pupils suddenly shrank, and Xiaonan looked at the explosive talismans wrapped around her body slowly melting away. Her chakra soared to the limit, and she escaped from the sand-colored clay layer at the fastest speed in her life. At the same time, she detonated the explosive talismans all over her body. Boom, boom, boom. An endless amount of fire suddenly rose from the inside of the sand-colored clay ball. The blazing fire spread out along with the endless waves of air. The corrosive liquid that was wrapped around the ball was pushed to the sides. Only then did Xiaonan escape from it safely. Sure enough, I can't be careless. Xiaonan's eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and the murderous intent on her face gushed out like a tide. Xiaonan looked at the proud Terumi Mei, and her eyes were even colder. Although she escaped from the layers of lava release, at the critical moment, Conan was not unscathed. At the very least, she was like Terumi Mei now. It's fair this way. Terumi Mei looked at Xiaonan with a smile. The latter's clothes were also eroded by lava release. Xiaonan was similar to her before, and her skin was exposed to the sun. Of course, there was also dustless. I won't let you go, Xiaonan said with a gloomy expression. A cold aura emerged between her brows, trying to drive away the unnaturalness on her face. After all, Wu Chen was watching this scene with relish in the distance. It's really a rare scene in 100 years. It seems that my Tensigen's insight ability can finally come in handy. Although the location of the battle was a few kilometers away, Dustless could still clearly perceive that Conan and Terumi Mei were almost in a state of undress. At the moment he exerted the insight ability of Tensigen to the limit. The situation of Xiaonan and Terumi Mei was naturally in his eyes. The corner of his mouth raised a strange smile. It was also fun to watch the fight between the two heaven's favored children. Chapter 193. In the hot room filled with steam, one couldn't even see their own fingers. Everywhere was filled with thick fog, and everything was gray. Looking at the ground, a luxurious pool quickly came into view. Bubbles gushed out from the bottom of the pool from time to time. The water temperature wasn't hot, and it was very suitable for bathing. Kakuzu, I can be sure that those 4 people must be working hard to catch the tailed beasts now. How can they be as comfortable as us? They are simply stupid. An arrogant voice resounded through the white space. Looking around, it was Fei Duan with a smug smile on his face. He leaned naked against the warm pool with his eyes closed comfortably. This is not bad. They must be catching the tailed beasts. The robust man nodded. On his back, there were 4 masks with different expressions. It was strange and terrifying. Especially the wounds and traces of healing all over his body, which added to the horror of this man. The 2 people who are currently soaking in the hot spring are Fei Duan and Kakuzu. Originally, the 2 of them came to look for the 7-tailed Jinchuriki, but after searching hard, they didn't find any trace of it. Fei Duan simply brought Kakuzu to soak in the hot spring and enjoy the life of a normal human. But then again, as if thinking of something, Fei Duan looked at the mask on Kakuzu's back curiously and said in disbelief, "Can you really understand the relaxation of soaking in the hot spring? I feel that you are like a skeleton with an empty shell. You have lost your original inner soul." Looking at Kakuzu, who was hollowed out, Fei Duan seemed to be surprised that Kakuzu was still alive. His hands patted the mask on Kakuzu's back uncontrollably, and his face was full of curiosity. "I have indeed lost my soul, and I am living like a walking corpse." Slightly glancing at Fei Duan, he looked like a curious baby. After looking at his innocent face, the corner of his mouth raised into a sneer. "Once upon a time, I was like you now, a little brat who didn't know anything. I am not a little brat who doesn't know anything." Slamming the white mask on Kakuzu's back, Fei Duan spat at Kakuzu angrily, then leisurely returned to the previous place and lay down again. However, it was also those guys who allowed me to see the essence of this world. From a certain perspective, If it weren't for them pushing me into the dark hell, it's not impossible for me to have died long ago. I have to thank them for being able to live until now. As if thinking of the past, Kakuzu said to himself with mixed feelings. Even Fei Duan, who didn't understand anything, felt the same and fell silent. The Akatsuki organization was a gathering of elites from all over the world, but it was also the embodiment of tragedy. Behind each and every one of them, there was a bitter and unbearable past. Time passed unknowingly, and in the blink of an eye, half an hour had passed. Feng, I think she's here. The dejected Kakuzu suddenly opened his eyes. His oily green eyes squinted slightly. The light that shot out from his eyes was chilling. Even though Kakuzu's voice was very calm, and from his tone, it seemed like he knew that brat called Maple before. Everyone could hear the ruthless killing intent in his voice. Obviously, Kakuzu wanted to completely cut off the grievances and entanglements of the past this time. Fei Duan also opened his eyes when he heard the words, and began to quickly put on his clothes. The Nanabai Jinchuriki has been searching for a long time. If they let her slip away like this, the two of them didn't have the courage to face Pain's anger directly. After just a few seconds, the two ran out of the hot spring. After looking at the figures in front of them, Fei Duan and Kakuzu looked at each other and exchanged glances. Combined with the information of the Akatsuki, it should be her. Fei Duan stared at the little girl in front of him with interest, and several ninjas around her, and after careful observation, he was very serious and affirmed. Kakuzu nodded. After looking around, he frowned slightly and then muttered, "There are too many people here, so it's not convenient to do it. Let's follow her for the time being, and wait for a place where there are fewer people to kill her." Fei Duan shrugged, indicating that he had no problem. The cool evening breeze of the night came from afar, and it was particularly comfortable and cool in the hot summer. In the empty woods, the dark red bonfire was obvious, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. "This is your last dinner." Two figures stood in the depths of the dark forest, staring at the several figures in the distance. Kakuzu muttered to himself, especially the girl with short blue hair and pale skin. Her eyes were vaguely human. This made Fei Duan have a whole new level of respect for the cruel and merciless Kakuzu. He didn't expect that this old guy still had the legendary humanity. The blue-haired girl was called Maple, and she was a ninja of the Waterfall Village. She was also the current Jinchuriki of the Nanabai. "Fei Duan, later you go over and sneak attack them. Remember to take off Akatsuki's uniform. Don't let them recognize us as accomplices. Lure away those insignificant brats. Only leave Maple in place." After pondering for a long time, Kakuzu said inexplicably, but his tone was unprecedentedly firm and unquestionable, "Isn't it enough to kill them directly?" Fei Dan looked at Kakuzu in confusion. His tone immediately turned gloomy and his face turned cold. He looked at Kakuzu and said sarcastically, "Kakuzu, don't tell me that it's because of that ridiculous sympathy in your heart that you're planning to let that little girl Seven Tails go." "Sympathy? Bullshit. After so many years, you still don't understand me, Fei Duan." Glancing at Fei Duan, Kakuzu sneered again and again, and then looked at the Waterfall Village ninjas who were singing and dancing around the bonfire, and his eyes were filled with monstrous hostility and beast-like madness. He smiled and said, "You are too stupid, Fei Duan. You still can't see my purpose. It's really disappointing. Don't you think it's interesting to be killed by the person you trusted the most in the past?" Chapter 194. Haiden looked at the crazy Kakuzu with astonishment. He didn't expect Kakuzu to have such a vicious idea. This kind of insidious killing method can no longer be described as vicious. It's simply insane. "Then I'll accompany you in this play, but this won't happen again." Looking at the ruthless expression on Kakuzu's face, Haiden nodded uncomfortably. In his heart, he secretly slandered Kakuzu. If he angered this old man, maybe he would join forces with Sasori to capture him, and then make Sasori into a material specimen. Fei Duan knew that Scorpion of the Red Sand was after his body. After saying that, Haiden took off his black trench coat of the Akatsuki, revealing his strong physique. His whole body had indescribable curves. Without waiting for Kakuzu to speak, Haiden jumped out with his 3-section great scythe in his hand. His expression was fierce, and his whole body was like a hurricane. Against the backdrop of the night, Haiden was like a death god coming out of the forest. Especially the cold light of the 3-section great scythe. It made people's scalp numb, and their nerves almost collapsed. Who is it? Although these ninjas of Waterfall Village are still young and weak, they are not rookies. At least, they can distinguish murderous aura. So when Haiden deliberately released his murderous aura, these kids noticed it. Useless trash, of course. I'm the one who will tear you to pieces. Haiden's cheeks were ferocious. He was the slowest person in the Akatsuki, but for these kids who haven't experienced the world, his speed was absolutely unparalleled. Poochie. A cold light flashed in the dark night sky, and they could vaguely see a young figure being cut in half at the waist. He didn't even have the strength to fight back. Haiden was ferocious like a wolf in a flock of sheep. He seemed to have forgotten the task given to him by Kakuzu. For a time, he just enjoyed the pleasure of killing. In just a few minutes, the ninjas of the Waterfall Village were slaughtered. Useless bastard, it seems that it's my fault. I shouldn't have overestimated his IQ. The corner of Kakuzu's mouth twitched violently as he secretly scolded himself for being an idiot. How could someone like Fei Duan, who was easily controlled by emotions, casually give him a mission? Seeing his painstakingly planned plan fail, Kakuzu sighed in disappointment, then walked over gloomily, planning to catch them all in one fell swoop with Haiden. Clang! The buzzing sound of steel colliding spread throughout the dark forest, setting off faint sparks that disappeared in an instant. These two brats are not bad. Dustless was stunned when he felt that his unstoppable scythe had been stopped. Through the sparks that had disappeared before, he saw that the two strong boys had actually blocked his attack. Although he only used less than 20% of his strength, these two brats could actually block it, which really surprised Fei Duan. Why aren't you leaving, Feng? The taller boy among them was struggling to hold on. His small face was full of sweat, and it was obvious that he was about to reach his limit. He shouted angrily at the girl behind him. You are far more important to the village than us. The future of the village is all on your head. Yes, go Feng. The other boy, who was slightly shorter, shouted in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with determination as if he was facing death. Obviously he was going to fight Fei Duan. I won't go. The girl with short blue hair choked as she looked at Fei Duan's ferocious eyes without fear. She tried to keep calm, but when she saw the sharp scarlet scythe, she was still frightened, and there was an unconcealable fear in her watery eyes. Go. Don't worry, I will send you all to hell, and then you will naturally meet in the underworld. Fei Duan sneered at the two brats, and his eyes flashed with praise. These two brats seemed to be only 12 or 13 years old, but they had the strength of Chunin, and they could barely be regarded as geniuses. At the same time, Fei Duan's palm slightly exerted force, and he immediately cut the previous tall boy in half. Ah! Bright red blood splattered all over the blue-haired girl's face. She looked in horror at Fei Duan, who was like a demon king of hell. Maple finally gave up on the insistence in her heart, and quickly ran back into the dark forest behind her. Although it's different from the plan, the result is still the same. Seeing this scene, Kakuzu immediately followed without hesitation, and his green eyes were shining with a fierce light, and he rushed up like a ghost. For Kakuzu, who had the strength of a Kage, it was easy to catch up with such a little girl. Who are you? Kakuzu? Feng thought that the person in front of her was an accomplice of Fei Duan, and she thought that she would die on the spot, but after waiting for a long time, the person in front of her didn't kill her. She opened her eyes in horror, and what reflected in her cheeks was an unexpectedly familiar face. Although the person in front of her was particularly terrifying, in Feng's eyes, he was particularly intimate. Yo Feng, it's been a long time. The feeling Kakuzu gave at this moment was completely different. His face was ferocious, but he had a warm smile, although it looked a bit strange. Woo! Feng immediately lay on Kakuzu's leg and began to sob. Her tear-stained face bloomed with an angelic smile. Full of hope, she pointed to the place behind her and cried. All the ninjas in the village were killed by that scythe bastard. You must avenge them. The scythe bastard Feng was talking about was undoubtedly Fei Duan. Of course, no problem. I will definitely kill that scythe bastard and avenge your friends. With a smile on his face, Kakuzu promised, and at the same time, he took Feng's little hand and walked to the place where the battle took place. However, as if she couldn't wait, Feng left Kakuzu behind and ran alone to the place where the battle took place. If you want to hate that you were born in an ugly village like the Waterfall Village. Goodbye, Feng. With a cold smile on his face, Kakuzu took the opportunity to throw the black kunai in his hand straight toward the little girl's abdomen. Chapter 195. Pucci. The sharp dagger pointlessly pierced through the girl's abdomen, leaving a bloody hole in her body. The hideous wound was a mess of flesh and blood. Intense pain instantly spread throughout her body. Young Lady Maple couldn't bear it and fell to the ground. She rolled and crawled a few times before stopping. Yo, Kakuzu, you're finally done. Haiden looked at Kakuzu and waved his hand, indicating that he was here. However, he was ignored by Kakuzu, who didn't even look at him. This made Haiden very angry, and he cursed Kakuzu for burning the bridge after crossing the river. How do you feel, Maple? Kakuzu's face was expressionless as he looked at the half-dead Maple. His voice wasn't as gentle as before. Instead, it was cold and filled with killing intent. I'm not asking you how painful your wounds are. I'm asking you how it feels to fall from heaven to hell. Is it unforgettable? Kakuzu's voice was filled with killing intent as he looked at the half-dead Maple. Kakuzu's voice was filled with killing intent. At this time, Haiden put on the Akatsuki uniform again and stood beside Kakuzu. Why did you do this? Maple looked at Kakuzu in disbelief, and her small face was full of shock. The Kakuzu in front of her was completely different from the previous Kakuzu. He was covered with coldness from the depths of hell, and his temperament was isolated from the world. Do you feel pain? Kakuzu glanced at Maple faintly, and the corner of his mouth raised a smile, and he said indifferently, It seems that you finally understand how I felt. This pain of falling from heaven to hell was given to me by the people of Waterfall Village. If I kill you now, as the hope of Waterfall Village, you will fall. They will also understand the feeling of falling from heaven to hell, and they will never be able to let it go. Kakuzu's tone was extremely harsh. Decades ago, he received a mission from the higher-ups of Waterfall Village to assassinate the first Hokage. After Kakuzu arrived in Konoha, he fought the first Hokage, but he didn't expect to be defeated by the first Hokage's would release. After several turns, he finally escaped from the tiger's mouth and returned to Waterfall Village. After returning to the village, Kakuzu faced a heavy punishment for failing the mission, and was mercilessly imprisoned in prison. The ninja who gambled his life for the village was cruelly treated. Since then, Kakuzu was pushed far away from hell, so he escaped from prison with a very strong hatred. A little brat will always be a little brat. I can't understand Lord's feelings. Looking at the unconscious Feng, Kakudo curled his lips, and the sadness in his eyes disappeared. He said to Fei Duan, Take her away. This way, the mission will be considered completed. Without even looking at Maple, Kakuzu turned and left. 7 days later in the Rain Village. The first group to return was naturally Dustless and Conan. The second was Kakuzu and Haiden, and the last was Uchiha Itachi and Kisame. Under Pain's force, although Sasori and Deidara still had contradictions, they successfully formed a new team. All the wild-tailed beasts were collected. Dustless thought that the matter was over, but he didn't expect that Uzumaki Nagato's brain was twitching, and he continued to make money according to Pain. It was to gather a lot of money for future use. However, whether it was Dustless or the other members of the Akatsuki, they all scoffed at Pain's statement. Therefore, after the collection of tailed beasts was completed, in addition to the Jinchuriki of the major ninja villages, the members of the Akatsuki began to embark on the task of earning extra money, accepting various tasks all day long to earn a lot of money. This work took a few more years. Uzumaki Naruto finally graduated. It's really hard, but this day has finally come. In a dark room unknown to others, Dustless looked at Zetsu in front of him, nodded with satisfaction, and breathed a sigh of relief. The day he had been waiting for finally came. Just yesterday, Uzumaki Naruto finally graduated successfully and became a genin, and so did Uchiha Sasuke. But Uzumaki Naruto's ability to resist attacks is really strong. I controlled Kyuubi to attack Konoha twice, and that kid could still survive countless taunts. It's really a miracle. Dustless was speechless, and he couldn't help but look at Uzumaki Naruto in a new light. His powerful positive energy made Dustless ashamed. According to his expectations, even if Uzumaki Naruto explodes with Kyuubi's power, it's not impossible to destroy Konoha. That kid is really strong. Even in the face of the taunts of the whole village, he survived. In the past few years, White Zetsu secretly spied on Uzumaki Naruto according to Dustless's instructions. It can be said that he witnessed Uzumaki Naruto's childhood. How about Uchiha Sasuke? Then thinking of his third brother who lived in the shadow of Uchiha Itachi, Dustless suddenly asked with a little expectation in his tone. Dustless-sama, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. This time, Black Zetsu, who never spoke much in front of him, said, Uchiha Sasuke's performance is ordinary. He lives in Itachi's shadow all day long, training himself almost like hell. That's really hard work. Dustless smiled faintly. It seems that kid hates Uchiha Itachi deeply, but if he knew that he was the one who killed Uchiha Itachi and forced the Uchiha clan to perish, what kind of expression would he have? Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto, and a girl named Haruno Sakura were all assigned to the same class. Their teacher is an elite jonin named Kakashi, who recently took the task of escorting an old man to the Wave Country. White Zetsu reported truthfully. He didn't dare to hide anything and continued. Also recently, the leader of Konoha's root division, Shimura Danzo, has frequently contacted Orochimaru, the Sand-Hidden Village, and other villages. The specific purpose is unknown. Don't mind the clown. Dustless waved his hand, indicating that there is no need to worry about this kind of trivial matter. He just smiled casually. It's unrealistic for a floater to shake the world. Chapter 196. Shimura Danzo's dream of being the Hokage will never be extinguished. As long as he doesn't become the Hokage, or if he doesn't die, his dream of being the Hokage will always burn in his heart, driving away his reason until the day he becomes the Hokage. But this is a good opportunity to take advantage of it. With a cold smile on his face, Dustless secretly despised Shimura Danzo. He's afraid that he wants to use this Chunin exam as an opportunity to attack Sandame's prestige. It's best if he can pull Sandame down from the position of Hokage and replace him. Dustless-sama, you mean? White Zetsu looked at Dustless with a puzzled face. Black Zetsu was silent, pretending not to know anything, and just quietly waiting for Dustless's explanation. Dustless just smiled faintly and didn't say much. After a moment of contemplation, he suddenly formed a seal with one hand, and the ground suddenly cracked, and 3 rotten coffins suddenly emerged from the depths of the ground. Sandame has lived for most of his life, and he knows too many things. He's an antique from decades ago, and his time has come to an end. There are many people who want him dead, so we don't need to do anything. Dustless quietly looked at the 3 coffins in front of him, and he sneered again and again. The 3 coffins in front of him were the first Hokage, second Hokage, and fourth Hokage. In fact, when he attacked Konoha 12 years ago, Dustless secretly transferred the bodies of Hashirama and Tobirama. At that time, although Hashirama's Edo Tensei body was destroyed by him using Yin-Yang release, his soul was not sealed. The same was true for Tobirama. As long as he used Edo Tensei again, he could still summon the 2 of them. As for Minato, he was directly killed by Dustless, and his body was perfectly preserved until now. Is it possible that Dustless-sama means to give Orochimaru the bodies of the Hokage? Black Zetsu immediately understood Dustless's meaning. Orochimaru's grievances with Sandame are known to the world. I'm afraid that after getting these precious corpses, he will immediately attack Konoha during the Chunin exam. The grudges between Orochimaru and Sandame are not shallow. The 2 can even be said to be irreconcilable existences, If there is an opportunity to kill Sandaime, he will not let it go. Indeed, let Orochimaru help me kill Sandaime-sama. There is no need for us to do it ourselves. Dustless nodded slightly and admitted indifferently, then immediately frowned. Orochimaru was also a scheming person. If these 3 coffins were sent to his door like this, even if he was stupid, he would know that someone was cheating him. Because the corpses of Shodaime, Nidaime, and Yondaime have completely disappeared since Dustless attacked Konoha. Suddenly jumping to the door of Otogekyure, Orochimaru was suspicious. It's good to pass them to Orochimaru through Kabuto's hands. After pondering for a while, Black Zetsu suggested, Kabuto is Orochimaru's spy. We can pass the corpses of the past Hokage to him through his hands. Orochimaru should not be suspicious if it's from his trusted hands. This is a good idea. It's worth a try. Dustless nodded. Orochimaru really trusted Kabuto and regarded him as his right-hand man. It's better to give the corpses of the past Hokage to Orochimaru than Dustless himself. Put all the corpses of the past Hokage in Danzo's root. With the corner of his mouth raised in disdain, Wuxia sneered. In this way, the origin of the corpses can be clearly explained. Orochimaru knew Shimura Danzo's way of doing things, and he knew that Shimura Danzo was the one who secretly hid the corpses of Hokage, and used them to secretly study forbidden jutsu. Orochimaru is eager for the abilities of Shodaime and Nidaime, who are deified by the world. Now with the help of Minato's corpse, I think he will completely tear apart Konoha's face. He can't wait to implement his plan of destruction. Shimura Danzo is also trying to be clever, and in the end he only benefited Tsunade. Dustless said. Orochimaru's attack on Konoha was not worried at all. Instead, it was Shimura Danzo who led the wolf into the house. The so-called Chunin exam was nothing more than a blow to Sandaime's prestige. As a result, Orochimaru, a ferocious snake, bit Sandaime to death, and Konoha itself suffered great losses. And in the end, the person who got the throne of the 5th Hokage was Tsunade. Zetsu, send the corpses of the 3 to the root. Remember to do it quickly, and without leaving any traces. Remember not to let others find out that it has something to do with us. Dustless waved his hand at Zetsu with a dignified tone. Understood, Dustless-sama. Zetsu nodded, and then his body sank into the depths of the ground. The 3 coffins Dustless summoned before also disappeared. Obviously, they were taken to Konoha by White Zetsu. Zetsu's action was fast enough. Of course, he didn't have the courage to disobey Dustless's order. That night, he sent the corpses of the past Hokage to the root. And in just a few days, Kabuto, who was secretly responsible for contacting Shimura Danzo, accidentally found the corpses of the past Hokage, and without any hesitation, he stole them and gave them to Orochimaru. This was also the reason why the Kyuubi broke out again a few years ago, and the root department was destroyed on a large scale. Otherwise, with Kabuto's strength, he wouldn't have been able to steal anything from the root department. After Orochimaru got the corpses of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Hokage, he was like a treasure. Almost all day long he worked hard in the laboratory. Just like Dustless thought, at first he suspected that someone was tricking him, and even guessed that Kabuto had been bribed, but as time passed, Orochimaru's suspicion faded. Kabuto had no reason to betray him, and the corpses of the past Hokage were also real. Orochimaru also felt that Kabuto's origin was reasonable. He knew Shimura Danzo's ambition. As Dustless expected, Orochimaru began to plan a sneak attack on Konoha in detail. He was determined to wait until the Chunin exam to completely wipe out Konoha's ninja village. Chapter 197. Since Orochimaru got the corpses of the Hokage, he carried out a series of crazy experiments, such as human experiments, cell experiments, and the so-called curse experiments. Everything related to the Hokage's corpses was forcibly added by Orochimaru. Even if most of them were insignificant, they couldn't resist Orochimaru's enthusiasm. In Orochimaru's laboratory, there were a lot of green liquid gas, all of which were his various experimental bodies. Everyone couldn't help but sigh at Orochimaru's dedication to the Hokage's corpses. Orochimaru-sama, the fourth Kazekage of the Sand-Hidden Village, hopes to form an alliance with us to launch a sneak attack on Konoha. Next to Orochimaru, Kabuto reported the current situation respectfully. In addition to being undercover in Konoha, he usually took time to come back and see. Of course, this was also Orochimaru's idea. Fourth Kazekage Raza is really sensitive. Orochimaru, who was doing experiments, was slightly startled. He stopped the task at hand and sneered. As a close neighbor of Konoha, the Sand-Hidden Village was naturally very afraid of the powerful Fire Country. Maybe one day Konoha would be unhappy and take it out on them. Although this was just a simple assumption, it also showed the Sand-Hidden Village's uneasiness. So you mean to reject them? Kabuto asked cautiously, especially when he saw the distorted human bodies on the test bench. He couldn't help but have goosebumps all over his body. Even if he had seen this scene countless times, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Orochimaru was a temperamental and unscrupulous person. Maybe one day, he would be the one lying there. Orochimaru just glanced at Kabuto's unnatural expression and said disdainfully, "The fourth Kazekage overestimated the power of the Sand-Hidden Village and underestimated the strength of Odogekure." Without obtaining the corpses of the previous Hokage, Orochimaru did intend to form an alliance with the Sand Village, but now that he has obtained the corpses of the three Hokages, he can use the Edo Tensei to resurrect them, so forming an alliance with the Sand Village is meaningless. Refuse? Orochimaru glanced at Kabuto and said cruelly, "Why should I refuse? Isn't this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to kill the fourth Kazekage? At that time, I will replace the fourth Kazekage and mix into Konoha. Sarutobi-sensei will die in my hands. Don't you think it's a blessing? Masters should feel gratified to see their disciples surpass themselves." Orochimaru's pale face was full of killing intent, and he said with an extremely cold smile. His hoarse voice was very harsh. Not to mention being stared at by Orochimaru, just hearing his incomparably cold voice gave people an indescribable sense of oppression, which made people have a mental breakdown. Orochimaru-sama is right. Yakushi nodded. After obtaining the corpses of the previous Hokage, the Sand Village's alliance wasn't that important anymore. Killing the fourth Kazekage wasn't a difficult task. He could wait until the Chunin exam to ambush him. Moreover, Orochimaru can borrow the power of the Sand-Hidden Village, including the tailed beasts of the Sand-Hidden Village. With all these reasons combined, it's better for the Kazekage to die. Orochimaru-sama. At this moment, Orochimaru's voice sounded. He looked up and saw the pale-faced boy kneeling on the ground and bowing his head respectfully. This boy was Kimimaro, one of Orochimaru's confidants. "You came at the right time." Seeing Kimimaro's arrival, Orochimaru smiled and looked at Kimimaro with satisfaction. His snake eyes flashed with pity. The power of Shikatsu Myaku was known to the world. Kimimaro should have been the most suitable vessel for reincarnation, but he was suffering from an incurable disease. "What do you think of my plan?" Orochimaru looked at Kimimaro expectantly and asked with interest. Kimimaro wasn't only strong, but his thinking ability was also good. Kimimaro's eyes flashed with hesitation, and after thinking for a while he frowned and said, "The plan can't keep up with the changes, the faster the better. I suggest that we immediately use the negotiation as an excuse to lure the fourth Kazekage out of the Sand-Hidden Village, and then join forces to kill him." "It makes sense." Orochimaru nodded when he heard this. If he waited until the day of the Chunin exam, it might be too late. Only by killing the Kazekage, now can he use his identity as a Kazekage to maximize his value. 2 days later, I will send someone to lure the fourth Kazekage out of the Sand-Hidden Village, and we will besiege him. Looking at Kimimaro's appreciative eyes, Orochimaru said with a gloomy voice. The murderous intent in his snake eyes was particularly obvious. He didn't dare to say that he would fight with Kimimaro alone. After all, he was a Kage. In the rain-hidden village, in a dark room with dirty lights, Dustless was leisurely lying on the soft sofa. Frankly speaking, ever since he entered Akatsuki these past few years, he had never been leisurely. He was busy all day long with the so-called mission. This was the so-called working to earn extra money. Of course Kakuzu, who loved money as much as his life, was more than happy to do this. He was the most hard-working one. Dustless, Sama, Orochimaru has sent his men to contact the Kazekage, but he doesn't seem to intend to form an alliance with the Kazekage. Instead, he secretly took a few confidants to ambush the Kazekage in advance. It seems that he wants to attack the Kazekage. White Zetsu stared at Dustless, who was lying on the sofa, and seriously reported the situation of Orochimaru. He didn't dare to hide anything. Dustless just nodded silently and frowned. He didn't expect Orochimaru to kill the Kazekage at this time. Fine, let him be. He's helping me by doing this. With a smile on his face, Dustless was no longer entangled. His eyes flashed with a dazzling light. The Sandaime knew too many secrets. Uchiha Itachi's condition for joining the Akatsuki was that he wasn't allowed to attack Konoha. Now, using Orochimaru's hand to kill the third Hokage is the most appropriate. Chapter 198. Orochimaru's plan was being carried out like a hot tea. This old guy really had the nature of an ambitious person. He took one step at a time. He evolved the plan until it was watertight, then he decided to implement it. It was normal for him to be so cautious. After all, the fourth Tsuchikage of the Sand Village was also a Kage-level powerhouse. After a series of intense preparations, Orochimaru finally decided to kill the Yondaime-sama Kazekage and replace him during the Chunin exam. Land of Wind, Sand-Hidden Village. Endless wind and sand covered the sky and covered the earth. Boundless hurricanes whistled, and the ground was a dry desert. There was no sign of life. It's no wonder that the Sand-Hidden Village would attack Konoha. Compared to Konoha's ninja village with superior geographical location, convenient transportation, warm climate and fertile land, the Sand-Hidden Village's territory is simply a stone in a latrine pit. In the cool valley, two groups of people could be clearly seen gathering, and their clothes were obviously different. Obviously, they belonged to two different forces. One of them was naturally the Sand-Hidden Village, and the other was naturally Orochimaru's Otogekyure. It seems that they are all here. Gazing at the flow of people in the valley below, two lonely figures could be clearly seen standing outside. They were wearing black windbreakers embroidered with red clouds and bamboo hats with bells tied to them. Occasionally, when a breeze blew past, there would be a clear and melodious sound. The two figures stood above the valley. One of them was a handsome young man who looked like he was only 18 or 19 years old. The other person's appearance was really unflattering. He had nepenthes on his shoulders, and he was also a black and white yin-yang. It was Dustless and Zetsu. Now Dustless is 26 years old, but his appearance is around 17 or 18 years old. As for the specific reason, only God knows. During this period, Otsutsuki Hagoromo also asked Dustless the reason. But Dustless really didn't know. According to his estimation, it should be that after one's strength reaches a certain level, even if they can't reach the exaggerated level of immortality, it shouldn't be a problem to maintain their appearance. Yondaime Kazekage is unusually calm. He dared to meet Orochimaru so easily. I don't know if he believes in his own strength, or if he's sure that Orochimaru won't harm him. White Zetsu's surprised voice sounded, and then he looked at the Kazekage frivolously. The contempt in his eyes was even more obvious, especially when he saw the Kazekage's entourage shaking their heads. Orochimaru is an S-class ninja. How can he be a kind person? Black Zetsu was also speechless. Yondaime Kazekage has a lot of followers. Most of them are Chunin. There are too few Jonin. And although Orochimaru's side only has a few subordinates, without exception, all of them are strong. All of them were once reincarnated bodies that Orochimaru spent a lot of effort to plunder. A pitiful person must have something to hate. Dustless curled his lips and looked at Yondaime Kazekage sarcastically. This guy is definitely not a good person. Dustless felt that it was a pity that he didn't kill this guy during the Third World War. Dustless's eyes moved slightly, and he saw Orochimaru's subordinates in the valley below, and his eyes flashed with appreciation. Orochimaru's subordinates are good. All of them have Kekkei Genkai, and they belong to the rare and extremely powerful kind. Dustless nodded, and his eyes stayed on Kimimaro and the others, but Black Zetsu looked at Kimimaro with interest, as if he had discovered a prehistoric creature, and his face was full of curiosity. Orochimaru, we can talk about cooperation in detail a few days before the attack on Konoha. It's a bit early to talk about this now. Yondaime Kazekage stared at Orochimaru's snake eyes and frowned slightly. There was still some time before the Chunin exam, and it was indeed early to talk about this. Kazekage-sama, there are some things that need to be said in advance. Orochimaru's pale face raised a smile, and there was a beast-like gaze hidden in the depths of his snake eyes. Yondaime Kazekage frowned slightly and looked at Orochimaru's subordinates behind him, and he nodded and chuckled. As expected of one of the Sannin, Orochimaru, your subordinates are all phoenixes. After saying that, Yondaime Kazekage walked towards Orochimaru, and his demeanor was quite amiable, giving a feeling of a spring breeze, as if they were brothers who hadn't seen each other for many years. They are indeed very good. Orochimaru nodded and accepted all the praise of Yondaime Kazekage, because this is an undeniable fact. His subordinates are all top-notch experts, and they can't even enter his eyes, and they aren't even qualified to be experimental subjects. Seeing Yondaime Kazekage striding towards him, Orochimaru's mouth curled into a cold smile. They are naturally very good. If they weren't good, how would I dare to ambush and kill Kazekage-sama? Wouch! After saying that, Orochimaru's body shuttled like lightning, crossing layers of space, and almost instantly appeared in front of Yondaime Kazekage. And under Yondaime Kazekage's horrified gaze, Orochimaru waved his sword of Kusanagi, and the cold light directly swept towards Yondaime Kazekage. Puchi! Yondaime Kazekage's abdomen was clearly visible, and although he avoided Orochimaru's attack, he was still injured. Enduring the pain in his abdomen, Yondaime Kazekage retreated for a distance. Kazekage-sama. Seeing that the Kazekage was injured by Orochimaru, the sand shinobi who came with Orochimaru hurriedly rushed over and looked at the wound on the Kazekage's abdomen worriedly. At the same time, they didn't forget to glare at Orochimaru with anger. You're still alive, worthy of being the Kage of the village. Orochimaru nodded slightly, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he said coldly, "Now I will send you to hell." With Orochimaru's order, the ninjas behind him suddenly rushed out, like wolves in a flock of sheep, killing the sand ninjas. The situation was almost in a state of destruction. You're tuning in to the Lee Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.